Certainty fractures first. Impossible relics whisper louder than empires ever dared. Every carved anomaly mocks modern confidence, inviting silent panic instead of easy wonder. Logic flickers, instincts hesitate, forgotten equations almost breathe. 10 ancient excavations conceal artifacts defying humanity's deepest assumptions, pulling perception beyond comprehension, until curiosity refuses escape completely. Cool limestone surrounds every passage, absorbing sound until even the softest footsteps seem to disappear. Deep beneath the streets of Malta lies the Hypogeum, an underground complex unlike almost any other surviving monument from the ancient world. Narrow corridors wind through carefully carved chambers, their walls shaped by human hands more than 5,000 years ago. Soft amber light reveals smooth stone surfaces, curved ceilings, and mysterious recesses whose original purpose is still debated. At the heart of this remarkable labyrinth rests one of its most fascinating spaces, a chamber whose unusual acoustic qualities have earned it the modern name, the Oracle Chamber. Standing before its small, carefully carved opening, the silence feels almost deliberate. The chamber appears modest at first glance, yet its proportions seem unexpectedly precise. Speak from a particular spot, and the human voice changes dramatically. Low frequencies resonate through the surrounding rock, producing vibrations that seem to travel far beyond the walls of the room itself. Visitors often describe the experience as deeply physical, feeling the sound as much as hearing it. Long before microphones, speakers, or scientific instruments, someone designed this space with extraordinary attention to acoustics. The Hypogeum dates to approximately 4000 to 2500 BC, making it older than many of the world's most famous stone monuments. Entirely excavated into limestone bedrock, it extends through multiple underground levels connected by stairways, passages, and chambers. Archaeologists generally agree that the complex served ritual and funerary purposes over many centuries. Thousands of human remains were recovered during excavations, suggesting that generations of communities returned here to honor their dead. Its discovery was accidental. In 1902, construction workers preparing foundations for new buildings unexpectedly broke into hidden underground chambers. At first, the significance of what they had uncovered was not fully understood. Only later did careful investigation reveal an immense prehistoric complex preserved beneath the modern city. Every newly explored passage expanded the picture of a sophisticated Neolithic society capable of remarkable engineering, using little more than stone tools, patience, and careful planning. Among the discoveries were pottery, carved figurines, beads, animal bones, and evidence of ceremonial activity. One small sculpture became especially famous, the so-called Sleeping Lady, depicting a reclining figure resting peacefully upon a decorated couch. Whether representing death, fertility, dreams, or something entirely different remains uncertain. Like many artifacts from the Hypogeum, it offers clues while refusing definitive interpretation. Yet another discovery has generated fascination for well over a century: the large collection of human skulls once found within the underground chambers. Early reports described thousands of skeletal remains deposited throughout the complex. Many of these belonged to individuals of different ages and both sexes, indicating repeated use across generations rather than a single burial event. Some accounts from the early 20th century claimed that unusual skulls had been identified among the collection. According to these descriptions, certain specimens appeared elongated or displayed anatomical features that observers considered uncommon. Exactly how many such skulls existed remains difficult to establish. Scientific documentation from the earliest excavations was not always as complete as modern archaeological standards would require. Excavation techniques have advanced enormously since then, and records produced during the first decades of exploration sometimes leave important questions unanswered. As a result, later researchers have occasionally struggled to verify details found in older publications or secondary accounts. The uncertainty surrounding the skull collection gradually created space for speculation. One frequently repeated claim suggests that several skulls lacked a clearly defined median sagittal suture, the fibrous joint normally visible along the top of the human skull. Some writers argued that these specimens represented a rare anatomical variation. Others questioned whether the observations had been accurately recorded at all. Since access to many original remains has been limited, debate has continued without reaching universal agreement. Anatomists point out that natural variation within human populations can occasionally produce unusual skeletal characteristics. Cranial shape varies considerably among individuals. Age, genetics, disease, developmental conditions, and even post-mortem changes can influence the appearance of skeletal remains. Artificial cranial modification, practiced by several ancient cultures around the world, can also dramatically alter skull shape through intentional binding during infancy. However, no broad, scholarly consensus supports the idea that the Hypogeum skulls represented an unknown human species, or an entirely separate lineage. Still, questions remain because not every early description is easy to evaluate today. Some researchers have wondered whether misunderstandings arose from damaged specimens or incomplete preservation. Others suggest that isolated anatomical variations may have become amplified through repetition in popular books and documentaries over many decades. As stories travel, certainty often grows while evidence remains unchanged. The mystery deepens when considering the remarkable acoustic properties of the oracle chamber itself. Modern acoustic experiments have demonstrated that sounds produced within the chamber resonate at frequencies capable of creating unusually powerful vibrations throughout portions of the underground complex. Researchers studying the chamber have noted that a deep male voice can produce resonance around frequencies that naturally amplify within the carved spaces. Listeners standing elsewhere inside the Hypogeum often report hearing the voice with surprising clarity, despite physical separation. Could the builders have intentionally designed these effects? Mainstream researchers generally believe this was entirely possible. Ancient communities possess generations of practical knowledge acquired through observation rather than formal science. Builders working within stone could easily have recognized that certain shapes enhanced echoes while others absorbed sound. If rituals formed part of life inside the Hypogeum, carefully controlled acoustics might have strengthened emotional experiences during ceremonies honoring ancestors or marking important social events. Imagine entering the underground chambers illuminated only by flickering oil lamps. Voices emerge from darkness, amplified by carefully carved stone. Every word seems larger than the speaker. Vibrations pass through the floor beneath bare feet. In such an environment, sound itself becomes architecture. From this perspective, the oracle chamber appears less mysterious than remarkably sophisticated. Yet, alternative interpretations continue to attract attention. Some independent researchers propose that the chamber's resonance served purposes beyond ritual communication. They speculate that repeated exposure to specific frequencies may have influenced human perception, meditation, or altered states of consciousness. A few point to modern studies examining how low-frequency sound can affect emotional responses or physical sensations. While intriguing, these ideas remain speculative when applied to the ancient builders, since no direct evidence reveals their intentions. Others move even further beyond conventional archaeology. According to various fringe theories, the unusual skulls and acoustic chamber form part of a larger puzzle, suggesting forgotten civilizations possessing advanced knowledge lost to history. Some imagine hidden schools of ancient wisdom operating beneath Malta. Others propose contact with unknown visitors, advanced prehistoric cultures, or civilizations erased by catastrophe long before recorded history began. These hypotheses capture imagination precisely because they attempt to explain features that appear extraordinary, yet they remain unsupported by convincing archaeological evidence. Artifacts recovered from the Hypogeum fit comfortably within what is currently understood about Neolithic Mediterranean societies, even if many aspects of their beliefs remain unknown. Perhaps the greatest mystery is not whether advanced technology existed, but how much sophisticated knowledge ancient communities achieved through observation alone. The underground complex demonstrates extraordinary planning. Multiple levels were excavated with impressive precision. Certain chambers imitate features commonly found in surface architecture, including carved doorways and decorative elements that serve no structural purpose underground. Such details suggest symbolic meaning rather than simple practicality. Why recreate houses beneath the earth? Many archaeologists interpret these features as representing a symbolic home for the dead, a place where ancestors continued their journey beyond ordinary life. Across many ancient cultures, burial spaces reflected beliefs about continuity rather than final endings. The Hypogeum may have embodied an entire spiritual landscape, carefully constructed beneath the living world. The skull collection naturally becomes part of this larger story. Were these individuals members of one community, or did people travel considerable distances to be buried within these sacred chambers? Ancient DNA research continues transforming archaeology across Europe, revealing unexpected connections among prehistoric populations. Each new scientific technique has the potential to answer questions once considered impossible. Yet, preservation challenges, incomplete excavation records, and the passage of more than a century since the site's discovery complicate every investigation. Visitors today experience only a carefully protected portion of the Hypogeum. Strict conservation measures limit access because human presence alters temperature, humidity, and carbon dioxide levels inside the fragile underground environment. These precautions help preserve one of humanity's oldest surviving ceremonial spaces for future generations. Even so, the atmosphere remains unforgettable. The deeper one descends, the farther ordinary life seems to retreat. Stone surrounds every direction. Time becomes difficult to measure. The chambers seem almost suspended outside history itself, preserving echoes from a civilization whose language has vanished completely. No written records explain who carved these passages, what songs once resonated through the oracle chamber, or what thoughts accompanied those carrying their dead into the darkness. Only the architecture continues speaking. Its walls preserve craftsmanship. Its silence preserves absence. Its acoustics preserve possibility. The skulls, whether entirely ordinary in biological terms or marked by uncommon natural variation, remind us how easily fragments of incomplete evidence can evolve into enduring mysteries. Scientific investigation continues refining what is known, while unanswered questions invite continued exploration rather than certainty. Perhaps that balance explains why the Hypogeum continues to fascinate both archaeologists and curious travelers alike. Every carefully measured fact exists beside another unanswered question. Every explanation illuminates one corner while leaving another in shadow. Deep below Malta, where ancient voices once echoed through carved stone, the oracle chamber still waits quietly, inviting each generation to listen and to wonder whether the greatest discoveries are those already uncovered or those that remain hidden beyond the next silent passage. Morning mist settles gently across the wetlands, softening every outline until land and water become almost indistinguishable. reeds sway with the slightest breeze, while dark pools reflect a pale northern sky. Beneath layers of peat and ancient mud lies one of the most remarkable archaeological sites ever uncovered in Britain, a place where fragments of everyday life survived for thousands of years because nature quietly sealed them away. This is Carr. Located in North Yorkshire, England, Carr appears almost ordinary at first glance. There are no towering temples, no massive stone circles, and no monumental walls rising above the landscape. Instead, its significance lies beneath the soil, hidden within waterlogged sediments that preserved organic materials rarely found elsewhere. Wood, antler, bark, bone, and plant remains endured where they would normally have disappeared long ago. For archaeologists, sites like this are extraordinarily rare. For anyone fascinated by humanity's distant past, they are windows into worlds that would otherwise remain invisible. Carr dates to around 9000 BC, placing it within the Mesolithic period, thousands of years before farming transformed Europe. The last ice age had recently ended. Glaciers had retreated northward. Forests slowly expanded across the landscape, while lakes and wetlands attracted countless species of animals. Human communities were still hunter-gatherers, moving with the seasons, adapting continuously to changing environments. It was a world both familiar and profoundly different. Dense birch and pine forests stretched across much of the landscape. Elk wandered through woodland clearings. Red deer moved cautiously between trees. Wild boar rooted through undergrowth. Wolves, bears, and lynx occupied territories where modern roads and towns now stand. Life demanded constant observation. Every footprint mattered. Every sound carried meaning. It was within this setting that a remarkable discovery emerged. During excavations beginning in the late 1940s, archaeologists uncovered dozens of unusual objects crafted from red deer skulls. These were not complete skulls. Instead, ancient people had carefully modified them. The upper portions of the skulls had been shaped and trimmed, leaving the antlers firmly attached. Sections of bone had been removed with extraordinary precision. Small perforations appeared in carefully chosen locations. These objects became known as the Carr headdresses. Even today, they remain among the most mysterious artifacts from prehistoric Europe. At first glance, they appear almost unsettling. The antlers remain intact, projecting upward exactly as they once did on living animals. Yet, beneath them, the skull has been transformed into something entirely different. The interior was hollowed out. Certain projections were removed. Evidence suggests that the artifacts could be secured onto a person's head, although precisely how they were worn remains uncertain. Imagine standing at the edge of an ancient lake before sunrise. Mist drifts across still water. Somewhere within the trees, a figure slowly emerges. Upon their head rests the antlered crown of a red deer. The distinction between hunter and hunted begins to disappear. Why were these extraordinary objects created? That question has inspired decades of research. The mainstream archaeological interpretation is cautious and grounded in available evidence. Many researchers believe the headdresses were likely used during hunting. By wearing the modified deer skull, hunters may have concealed their human appearance while approaching cautious animals. Similar practices have been documented among more recent hunting societies in different parts of the world, where disguises increase the likelihood of a successful approach. From this perspective, the Carr headdresses represent practical hunting equipment, enhanced by symbolic meaning. Yet, even this seemingly straightforward explanation raises additional questions. Creating one of these objects required considerable effort. The skull first had to be removed from the animal. Sections of bone were carefully cut away using stone tools. The remaining surfaces were shaped with deliberate precision. Some specimens display signs of heating, perhaps to soften the bone before modification. Experimental archaeologists attempting to recreate large quantities of worked antler had been deliberately deposited in shallow lake-edge waters. Wooden platforms or trackways may once have extended into wetlands. Animal remains appear in patterned distributions rather than random accumulations. Some archaeologists suggest these deposits represent ritual offerings instead of ordinary refuse. If so, Carr was more than a seasonal campsite. It may also have been a place where important ceremonies unfolded. Throughout human history, animals have occupied roles extending far beyond food. They become symbols, teachers, ancestors, messengers, guardians. Across countless cultures, people have sought connection with the natural world by adopting animal identities through clothing, masks, or ceremonial costumes. The Carr headdresses fit comfortably within this broader pattern, although their precise meaning remains unknown. One possibility is that they formed part of ritual performances connected to hunting. Perhaps wearing the antlers honored the spirit of the deer before or after the hunt. Many hunter-gatherer societies view successful hunting not as domination over animals, but as participation in a reciprocal relationship. Respect toward prey often occupies a central place within spiritual traditions. If similar beliefs existed at Carr, the headdresses may have represented gratitude, communication, or renewal rather than disguise alone. Unfortunately, no written records survive. No myths remain. No names have reached the present. Only the artifacts continue speaking, and they speak softly. Another intriguing feature involves the modifications themselves. Some researchers have observed that the skulls were not prepared identically. Different examples display subtle variations in cutting techniques and shaping. Could this reflect individual preferences? Different ceremonial roles? Separate generations of craftspeople? Or changing traditions over centuries? The site itself was occupied repeatedly across long periods. Rather than representing one brief moment, Carr appears to record generations returning to the same lakeshore. Season after season, year after year, perhaps century after century, certain places seem to accumulate memory. People return not because resources remain abundant alone, but because the location itself becomes meaningful. A spring, a mountain, a cave, a shoreline. Carr may have become one such place. As research expanded during the late 20th and early 21st centuries, archaeologists uncovered increasingly sophisticated evidence about the settlement. Wooden structures suggest semi-permanent occupation. Microscopic analysis reveals details of ancient vegetation. Chemical studies reconstruct seasonal environmental changes. Animal remains help identify hunting practices. The picture emerging is one of remarkable adaptability. These were not primitive wanderers surviving by chance. They possessed detailed ecological knowledge acquired over countless generations. They understood migration patterns, plant cycles, weather, animal behavior. Every decision reflected intimate familiarity with their environment. Against this backdrop, the headdresses become even more intriguing. Would individuals who understood deer so thoroughly choose to imitate them purely for concealment? Or were they expressing something deeper about the relationship between humans and animals? Anthropologists studying hunter-gatherer belief systems often encounter ideas unfamiliar to modern industrial societies. Rather than dividing the world sharply into humans and animals, some traditions describe all living beings as participants within a shared spiritual community. Animals possess awareness, intentions, agency, communication. In such worldviews, identity itself may become more fluid than modern assumptions allow. The headdresses could represent moments when individuals symbolically crossed those boundaries, not literally transforming into deer, but participating in rituals acknowledging kinship with the natural world. Such interpretations remain speculative, yet they arise from comparisons with documented cultural traditions rather than fantasy. Other researchers approach the evidence from psychological perspectives. Ceremonial clothing has extraordinary effects upon human perception. Masks, costumes, rhythmic movement, music, and repetitive chanting can profoundly influence emotional experience. Even today, uniforms alter behavior. Religious garments inspire reverence. Theatrical costumes transform performance. Could the star Carr headdresses have served similar functions? Once placed upon the head, the wearer no longer appeared entirely human. Vision narrowed beneath heavy antlers. Movement changed. Balance shifted. Identity itself may have felt altered. Whether during ritual, hunting, or storytelling, the experience could have been deeply immersive. Then there are the more unconventional interpretations. Some independent writers have described the headdresses as evidence of ancient shamans capable of entering altered states of consciousness and communicating with animal spirits. Within these theories, the antlers become instruments of transformation rather than symbolic decoration. The wearer supposedly crossed into spiritual realms where guidance, healing, or knowledge awaited. The term shaman itself, however, requires caution. It originates from cultures far removed in time and geography from Mesolithic Britain. Applying it directly to Star Carr risks oversimplifying traditions we cannot fully reconstruct. Modern archaeologists generally avoid assigning such labels without stronger supporting evidence. Even so, the possibility that ceremonial specialists existed within these communities cannot be dismissed entirely. Most societies, ancient and modern, include individuals responsible for guiding rituals, preserving oral traditions, or interpreting spiritual beliefs. Whether such figures existed at Star Carr remains unknown. Another intriguing aspect concerns the location itself. Why establish repeated occupation beside this particular lake? Ancient wetlands often occupy unusual positions within human belief systems. Neither solid land nor open water, marshes exist between categories. They shift continuously. Mist rises unexpectedly. Objects disappear beneath dark pools only to emerge centuries later. Across Europe, wetlands became places where valuable objects were intentionally deposited throughout prehistory. Weapons, jewelry, human remains, animal offerings. The pattern extends across thousands of years. Could Star Carr represent one of the earliest expressions of this enduring tradition? If ceremonial deposits occurred here, why choose water? Perhaps because water reflected the sky. Perhaps because lakes appeared as entrances to unseen worlds. Perhaps because offerings disappeared into depths beyond human reach. Or perhaps practical explanations account for everything. The challenge lies in distinguishing evidence from interpretation. Modern science continues revealing astonishing details unimaginable only decades ago. Microscopic wear patterns indicate how tools were used. Ancient DNA reconstructs biological relationships. Stable isotope analysis reveals diet and migration. Environmental reconstruction recreates vanished landscapes with increasing precision. Each technological advance sharpens the picture. Yet, some questions remain stubbornly resistant. Science can determine the age of a headdress. It can identify the species of deer. It can reconstruct climate. But can it explain belief? Can laboratory analysis recover awe? Can chemistry reveal what someone hoped, feared, or imagined while lowering an antlered mask onto their head 9,000 years ago? Those answers remain elusive. Perhaps that is why the star Carr headdresses continue captivating archaeologists, historians, and curious visitors alike. They exist at the edge of understanding. Unlike monuments built from stone, these fragile objects preserve moments of intimate human experience. Someone selected each deer, someone shaped each skull, someone wore each headdress, someone looked through those antlers toward an ancient forest that no longer exists. Perhaps children watched quietly as ceremonies unfolded. Perhaps stories accompanied every movement. Perhaps songs echoed across the lakeshore beneath stars, brighter than those visible today. Or perhaps these were simply practical hunting tools, later invested with meanings we can no longer fully recover. Both possibilities remain worthy of consideration. As excavations continue and analytical techniques improve, Star Carr consistently reminds researchers that early hunter-gatherer societies possessed levels of cultural complexity once underestimated. Their knowledge of landscapes, craftsmanship, and symbolic behavior challenges outdated assumptions about humanity's distant past. The antlered figures imagined walking beside the ancient lake remain silent. They offer no inscriptions, no explanations, only carefully shaped bone preserved by chance beneath wet earth. And perhaps that silence is precisely what gives them such enduring power. Because somewhere beneath the reeds, beneath the peat, beneath thousands of years of quiet accumulation, Star Carr still guards stories that have never been spoken aloud again. Whether those stories belong to skilled hunters, spiritual ceremonies, forgotten traditions, or something we have yet to recognize remains uncertain, and the mist over the ancient lake has never fully lifted. The earth is quiet in central Romania. Gentle hills roll across the countryside, their contours shaped by rivers that have flowed for countless generations. Fields stretch toward the horizon, interrupted by scattered forests and low ridges that reveal little of the civilizations once rooted beneath them. To a casual observer, the village of Tărtăria appears peaceful and unassuming. Yet, hidden beneath its soil lay 3 small pieces of clay that would ignite one of archaeology's longest-running debates. They fit comfortably in the palm of a hand. No towering monument announces their importance. No precious metals or elaborate carvings demand immediate attention. Instead, their mystery lies in something far more subtle. Tiny, incised symbols carefully arranged across their surfaces. Simple at first glance, profound upon closer inspection. These are the Tărtăria tablets. Discovered in 1961 during archaeological excavations led by Romanian archaeologist Nicolae Vlasa, the tablets emerged from a Neolithic settlement associated with what is now known as the Vinca culture, one of southeastern Europe's most sophisticated prehistoric societies. Alongside the tablets were human remains, figurines, animal bones, shell ornaments, and other ceremonial objects suggesting that the context of their burial may have carried considerable ritual significance. From the beginning, the discovery raised questions that continue to resist simple answers. The tablets themselves are modest. 2 are rectangular, 1 is circular. Each bears carefully incised markings unlike ordinary decoration. Some symbols resemble crosses. Others resemble branching lines, grids, circles, or abstract geometric forms. Several appear surprisingly organized, as though arranged intentionally rather than scattered randomly. One tablet contains small perforations, suggesting it may once have been suspended or attached to something. The markings seem deliberate, purposeful, measured. The question is not whether someone carved them. The question is why. At first, the discovery attracted attention primarily within archaeological circles. But as researchers examined the symbols more closely, an extraordinary possibility slowly emerged. Could these markings represent one of humanity's earliest systems of writing? If so, the implications would be enormous. For generations, historians identified Mesopotamia as the birthplace of writing, where cuneiform developed around 3200 BC. Ancient Egypt followed with its own hieroglyphic tradition during roughly the same period. These systems transformed administration, commerce, religion, and eventually civilization itself. Writing changed everything. It allowed information to outlive memory, knowledge to travel beyond individual lifetimes, governments to organize vast territories, religious traditions to preserve sacred narratives. History itself became possible. Yet, radiocarbon dating associated with the Tărtăria site suggested that the tablets could be significantly older, perhaps dating to around 5300 BC. If accurate, the symbols would predate Mesopotamian writing by well over 1,000 years. Such a conclusion immediately attracted both excitement and skepticism. The archaeological community soon divided into differing interpretations. The first and most cautious position argues that the markings are not writing in the true sense of the word. According to this view, the symbols belong to a broader tradition of symbolic expression practiced by Neolithic communities across southeastern Europe. Similar signs appear on pottery, figurines, spindle whorls, and other objects associated with the Vinca culture. These recurring motifs may have carried religious, social, or ceremonial significance without encoding spoken language. In other words, they communicate ideas without functioning as writing. This distinction is important. Modern people often associate symbols automatically with language. Yet, symbolic communication existed for tens of thousands of years before writing emerged. Cave paintings, body decoration, carved figurines, decorative motifs, sacred signs, all conveyed meaning. None necessarily represented words or grammar. Under this interpretation, the Tărtăria tablets become remarkable examples of symbolic thought rather than written documents. Even so, questions remain. The arrangement of certain symbols appears unusually structured. Some signs recur across multiple Vinca artifacts discovered hundreds of kilometers apart. The repetition suggests that communities recognized shared meanings attached to particular markings. Could this represent an early stage in the gradual evolution toward writing, or something entirely different? Another group of researchers proposes that the tablets preserve what scholars sometimes describe as proto-writing. This term refers to systems capable of recording limited information without representing full spoken language. Rather than preserving complete sentences, proto-writing may record ownership, religious concepts, quantities, identities, or ceremonial associations. Examples from later cultures include accounting tokens, ownership marks, and symbolic inventories that communicate specific ideas while lacking grammatical complexity. Could the Tărtăria symbols belong to such a system? It is certainly possible. If so, they would represent an important developmental step between purely symbolic art and fully developed writing. Not language captured completely, but language beginning to leave visible traces. Still, another challenge complicates the debate. The precise dating of the tablets themselves remains controversial. When discovered, the clay tablets had not been fired before burial. To preserve them after excavation, they were heated during conservation. Unfortunately, this treatment complicated later attempts to obtain direct dating from the artifacts themselves. Instead, archaeologists rely primarily upon the surrounding archaeological context. Some scholars question whether the burial context remained entirely undisturbed over thousands of years. Others defend the original excavation records while acknowledging inevitable uncertainties associated with archaeological work conducted during the early 1960s. Thus, even before interpreting the symbols, researchers continue debating the age of the objects. History occasionally turns upon surprisingly small uncertainties. A few centuries, a disturbed layer of soil, an incomplete excavation record. The entire chronology of early writing may depend upon details almost impossible to recover today. Meanwhile, attention increasingly shifted toward the broader Vinca culture itself. Far from being a primitive farming society, the people who created these settlements demonstrated remarkable sophistication. Between approximately 5,700 and 4,500 BC, Vinca communities occupied large areas of southeastern Europe, including parts of present-day Romania, Serbia, Hungary, and neighboring regions. Some settlements grew to astonishing sizes for their time. Excavations reveal carefully planned communities containing hundreds of houses arranged in organized patterns. Advanced pottery production flourished. Copper working appeared surprisingly early. Long-distance exchange networks transported valuable materials across considerable distances. Beautiful figurines displaying intricate craftsmanship emerged in large numbers. The archaeological evidence paints a picture of dynamic communities possessing highly developed social organization. This alone challenges outdated assumptions about Europe's Neolithic populations. Against such a backdrop, sophisticated symbolic systems become far easier to imagine. Perhaps complexity in communication developed alongside complexity in society. After all, larger communities often require increasingly elaborate methods of organizing knowledge. Religious traditions expand, trade networks grow, collective memory becomes more difficult to preserve through speech alone. Could the Tărtăria tablets reflect one community's attempt to solve this challenge? Or are modern observers projecting later developments onto much older objects? One particularly intriguing feature involves the apparent similarity between certain Vinca symbols and much later writing systems. Several researchers have noticed superficial visual resemblances between some tablet signs and early Sumerian pictographs. Others compare them to symbols appearing across various ancient Mediterranean traditions. Do these similarities indicate cultural connections, independent invention, or simple coincidence? Most mainstream archaeologists urge caution. Human beings naturally produce geometric forms. Straight lines, crosses, circles, grids, branches. Repeated shapes often emerge independently across unrelated societies because they are among the simplest designs available. Visual resemblance alone does not demonstrate historical connection. Yet, the comparisons continue inviting curiosity. Could ideas have traveled farther across prehistoric Europe and Western Asia than previously imagined? Trade certainly existed. Obsidian, shells, copper, pigments, stone. These materials moved across remarkable distances long before recorded history. If goods traveled, ideas likely traveled as well. How far? No one knows with certainty. The mystery becomes even more intriguing when considering the apparent ritual context of the tablet's discovery. Reports describe the tablets as being associated with the remains of an adult individual accompanied by ceremonial objects. Some interpretations suggest that this person occupied a special social or religious position. Others argue that the evidence remains insufficient to assign such status confidently. Nevertheless, the association encourages speculation. If the tablets possessed symbolic or sacred importance, Perhaps they belonged not to merchants or administrators, but to ritual specialists. Imagine a ceremony performed nearly 7,000 years ago. Clay objects carefully prepared, symbols deliberately incised, offerings arranged with precision, words spoken that vanished forever long before written history began. What did those symbols mean to the people gathered there? Did every participant understand them, or only a select few? Throughout history, specialized knowledge often becomes concentrated within small groups. Priests, scribes, healers, astronomers, story keepers. If symbolic systems carried sacred meaning, access to them may have been carefully controlled. Perhaps the tablets recorded myths, genealogies, seasonal cycles, sacred names, offerings, or perhaps something entirely different that modern categories fail to recognize. This uncertainty has naturally attracted more speculative interpretations. Some independent researchers argue that the Vinca symbols constitute humanity's first true alphabet. Others describe them as evidence for a forgotten European civilization, whose achievements were later overshadowed by developments in Mesopotamia. Still others suggest that the tablets preserve fragments of an advanced prehistoric culture lost through migration, environmental change, or societal collapse. These ideas remain controversial. No broad archaeological consensus supports claims that the tablets represent a complete writing system equivalent to later scripts. Nor is there convincing evidence that a forgotten global civilization created them. Yet, the persistence of such theories reveals something important. The tablets resist easy classification. Whenever evidence occupies uncertain territory, imagination naturally enters the conversation. Another fascinating aspect concerns memory itself. Modern societies depend heavily upon writing. Calendars, books, maps, contracts, digital files. We often forget that for most of human existence, memory functioned very differently. Entire histories survived through spoken tradition. Songs preserved genealogies. Stories encoded navigation. Rituals transmitted ecological knowledge across generations. Writing was not inevitable. It emerged gradually. Perhaps the Tărtăria tablets belong somewhere within that transition. Neither fully oral nor fully written. Instead, they may represent visible anchors supporting traditions still carried primarily through speech. A few symbols could trigger entire narratives known by heart. One sign might recall a seasonal ceremony, another a creation story, another the identity of an ancestor. Without shared cultural knowledge, modern observers see only silent markings. Meaning disappeared alongside the voices that once explained them. Advances in archaeological science continue expanding understanding of the Vinca world. Microscopic residue analysis reveals traces of ancient technologies. Settlement mapping reconstructs community organization. Radiocarbon dating refines chronologies. Isotopic analysis uncovers patterns of mobility and diet. Ancient DNA offers glimpses into biological relationships among prehistoric populations. Each discovery enriches the broader picture. Yet none has definitively solved the tablet's greatest mystery. Ironically, the objects remain eloquently silent. Perhaps that silence reflects their true significance, not because they refuse interpretation, but because they remind us how incomplete our knowledge remains. History often appears linear. One invention follows another. Civilization progresses steadily from simplicity toward complexity. The Tărtăria tablets quietly challenge that comfortable narrative. Human creativity rarely unfolds in perfectly straight lines. Ideas emerge, disappear, reappear. Entire traditions may flourish without leaving abundant archaeological traces. Technologies may develop independently in different regions. Knowledge can be forgotten as easily as it is discovered. This realization encourages humility. How many symbolic systems vanished without surviving examples? How many early experiments with communication dissolved into history because their materials decayed? Wood, leather, textiles, painted bark, knotted cords. Countless media leave little trace after thousands of years. Perhaps the surviving tablets represent only a tiny fragment of a much richer intellectual tradition. Or perhaps they are exceptional precisely because they were never part of one. That uncertainty continues inspiring investigation. Researchers still compare symbol sequences, study excavation records, analyze settlement patterns, debate chronology, refine definitions of writing itself. Morning light spreads gently across the rolling hills of central Romania. The landscape feels timeless. Rivers weave through broad valleys, birds circle above open fields, and scattered villages rest upon ground that has witnessed thousands of years of human life. Nothing about the scenery immediately suggests that one of archaeology's most enduring mysteries lies hidden beneath the earth. Yet, beneath these quiet fields, ancient communities once flourished long before pyramids rose beside the Nile or cities dominated the plains of Mesopotamia. Among the discoveries made here, few have inspired as much fascination as three small clay objects known today as the Tărtăria tablets. They are surprisingly modest. Unlike polished treasures displayed behind museum glass, the tablets appear rough and almost ordinary. One is circular, two are rectangular. Each fits easily into the palm of a hand. Their surfaces are marked with carefully carved lines, geometric figures, crosses, branches, circles, and abstract symbols that seem deliberate rather than decorative. Tiny perforations appear on one of the tablets, suggesting it may once have been suspended by a cord or attached to another object. At first glance, they resemble little more than pieces of ancient clay. But for more than half a century, these artifacts have quietly challenged historians, archaeologists, linguists, and anyone interested in the origins of civilization. Their mystery is remarkably simple to ask. What do these symbols mean? And perhaps even more importantly, are they writing? The tablets were discovered in 1961 during excavations directed by Romanian archaeologist Nicolae Vlasa at a Neolithic settlement near the village of Tărtăria. The excavation revealed evidence of a thriving prehistoric community belonging to what archaeologists identify as the Vinca culture, a civilization that occupied large parts of southeastern Europe between approximately 5,700 and 4,500 BC. The discovery itself occurred within an intriguing archaeological context. The tablets were reportedly found together with the remains of an adult individual accompanied by clay figurines, animal bones, shell ornaments, and other ceremonial objects. Although interpretations differ regarding the burial, many researchers agree that the surrounding artifacts suggest the objects possess significance extending beyond ordinary daily life. Whether ceremonial, symbolic, or practical remains uncertain. The uncertainty begins almost immediately. Unlike stone monuments or monumental architecture, small, clay artifacts rarely announce their purpose. Without written records explaining their use, archaeologists must reconstruct meaning from context alone. Every mark, every layer of soil, every associated object becomes part of a larger puzzle. As researchers examined the tablets, attention quickly focused upon the incised symbols covering their surfaces. Some markings resemble stylized trees, others resemble ladders, crosses, chevrons, parallel lines, boxes divided into compartments. Several signs appear repeatedly across different artifacts associated with the Vinca culture discovered throughout Romania, Serbia, Hungary, and neighboring regions. The repetition immediately suggested that these were not random scratches. Someone intentionally created these symbols. Someone expected them to communicate something, but what? For generations, historians have generally identified Mesopotamia as the birthplace of writing. Around 3200 BC, cuneiform gradually emerged as a sophisticated system capable of recording language. Ancient Egypt developed hieroglyphic writing during roughly the same period. These systems transformed administration, religion, commerce, and eventually history itself. Writing allowed knowledge to survive its creator. Stories no longer depended entirely upon memory. Governments expanded. Trade networks became increasingly complex. Ideas crossed generations with unprecedented stability. It marked one of humanity's greatest intellectual achievements. Then, the Tărtăria tablets entered the discussion. If the archaeological dating associated with the excavation proved accurate, these small clay objects could date to around 5300 BC. That would place them well over 1,000 years earlier than the earliest widely accepted writing systems. The implications were extraordinary. If the symbols truly represented writing, then one of history's oldest narratives about civilization would require significant revision. Naturally, such claims demanded careful examination. Mainstream archaeology responded with understandable caution. Many specialists argue that although the symbols are unquestionably deliberate, they should not automatically be interpreted as writing. Instead, they may represent a symbolic tradition shared across Vinca communities. Symbolic expression existed long before writing. People painted caves tens of thousands of years earlier. They carved figurines, decorated pottery, created ritual objects, produced abstract signs whose meanings were fully understood within their own communities. None of these necessarily represented spoken language. This distinction is subtle but important. A symbol may carry meaning without functioning as writing. A modern road sign communicates information despite containing no words. Religious icons convey ideas through imagery alone. Ownership marks identify individuals without recording speech. The Vinca symbols may have functioned similarly. Under this interpretation, the tablets become remarkable examples of symbolic communication rather than written documents. Yet even this explanation leaves fascinating questions unanswered. The symbols do not appear scattered randomly. Their arrangement often seems structured. Some signs occur repeatedly across artifacts separated by considerable distances. The consistency suggests shared conventions recognized throughout multiple communities. Could these represent early attempts to organize information visually? Perhaps not fully developed writing, but something approaching it. Some researchers therefore describe the markings as proto-writing. Proto-writing occupies an intriguing position between pure symbolism and complete written language. Rather than recording every spoken word, proto-writing may preserve specific categories of information: religious concepts, clan identities, trade goods, seasonal events, ceremonial instructions. It communicates selected ideas without reproducing ordinary speech. Several ancient societies passed through similar stages before developing complete writing systems. Could the Vinca culture have been exploring the same intellectual frontier? The possibility remains open. Complicating matters further is the question of dating. The tablets themselves underwent conservation shortly after discovery. Because they had not originally been fired in antiquity, they were heated during preservation. Unfortunately, this process prevented later direct dating methods from being applied effectively to the clay itself. As a result, archaeologists depend primarily upon the dating of surrounding materials recovered during excavation. Most accept the general Neolithic age of the site. Others urge caution regarding the precise chronology. Small uncertainties remain. Sometimes archaeology depends upon remarkably delicate details: a disturbed soil layer, an incomplete field notebook, a missing photograph. Centuries of history may hinge upon observations recorded during only a few hours of excavation. This uncertainty has encouraged continued investigation rather than definitive conclusions. Meanwhile, understanding of the Vinca culture itself has grown dramatically. Far from representing isolated farming villages, these communities displayed impressive levels of organization. Large settlements spread across southeastern Europe. Some covered dozens of hectares. Houses were arranged according to recognizable plans. Pottery displayed remarkable craftsmanship. Copperworking emerged surprisingly early. Trade networks connected distant communities through the exchange of stone, shells, pigments, and valuable minerals. The archaeological record reveals societies possessing technical skill, artistic creativity, and social complexity. Against such a background, sophisticated symbolic traditions become much easier to imagine. Complex communities often develop increasingly elaborate methods for preserving information. Oral traditions alone may eventually become insufficient. Rituals expand. Trade increases. Communities grow. Memory requires assistance. Perhaps the Tărtăria tablets represent one response to that challenge. Or perhaps they served an entirely different purpose that no longer fits modern categories. One particularly interesting observation concerns similarities between Vinca symbols and markings appearing elsewhere in the ancient world. Certain signs bear visual resemblance to symbols later found in Mesopotamia. Others appear comparable to motifs known from neighboring prehistoric cultures. Do these similarities indicate contact, shared ancestry, independent invention? Most archaeologists advise restraint. Simple geometric forms naturally arise across many civilizations. Lines, circles, crosses, triangles, grids. Human hands repeatedly produce similar patterns because they are among the simplest possible designs. Visual resemblance alone cannot demonstrate historical connection. Nevertheless, the comparisons continue provoking thoughtful discussion. Ideas travel surprisingly well. Long before recorded history, obsidian crossed mountains. Marine shells reached inland settlements. Copper moved across great distances. If materials traveled, perhaps certain concepts traveled alongside them. How extensive these prehistoric networks became remains an active field of research. The archaeological evidence continues expanding with every new excavation. The context surrounding the tablets introduces another layer of mystery. The reported association with human remains and ceremonial objects has encouraged interpretations extending beyond administration or trade. Perhaps the symbols carried religious significance. Ancient belief systems often relied upon visual signs whose meanings were restricted to particular ceremonies or social groups. A small object could possess enormous symbolic importance without requiring public explanation. Imagine a gathering nearly 7,000 years ago. Voices rise softly around a ceremonial space. Clay objects are carefully handled. Each carved mark carries meaning immediately understood by those present. No one imagines that thousands of years later, strangers will study the same symbols while struggling to interpret even the simplest sign. Meaning depends upon shared culture. When culture disappears, symbols become silent. Anthropologists frequently observe that memory within oral societies functions differently from memory in literate civilizations. Stories are preserved through repetition, songs, seasonal ceremonies, genealogies, movement across landscapes. Knowledge survives through living performance rather than permanent documents. Perhaps the tablets acted as memory aids. A handful of symbols could remind experienced storytellers of narratives already committed to memory. The markings need not record every word, only enough to awaken traditions carried by the community itself. If so, the tablets occupied a fascinating position between speech and writing, visible reminders supporting invisible knowledge. Of course, alternative interpretations have also emerged. Some independent researchers argue that the tablets represent the earliest complete writing system ever created. Others propose that the Vinca culture possessed unexpectedly advanced intellectual achievements later forgotten following societal decline. A few go further still, suggesting that the symbols preserve fragments of knowledge inherited from civilizations predating conventional history. These ideas capture attention because they offer dramatic explanations for genuinely unusual artifacts. Yet, the available archaeological evidence does not presently support such far-reaching conclusions. The mystery remains compelling without requiring extraordinary assumptions. Sometimes, uncertainty alone is enough. Perhaps the greatest lesson offered by the Tărtăria tablets concerns the nature of history itself. Historical narratives often appear neat and orderly. Agriculture emerges, villages grow, cities develop, writing appears, civilization advances. Reality rarely follows such simple paths. Human innovation unfolds unevenly. Ideas emerge independently. Experiments succeed or disappear. Entire traditions vanish without leaving abundant traces. The archaeological record preserves only fragments. Wood decays. Textiles vanish. Leather dissolves. Paint fades. Countless forms of communication disappear forever because the materials carrying them could not survive thousands of years beneath the earth. Clay happened to endure. How many other symbolic systems vanished completely? It is impossible to know. Modern scientific techniques continue revealing new dimensions of the Vinca world. Radiocarbon dating refines chronological sequences. Ancient DNA reconstructs biological relationships. Microscopic analysis identifies manufacturing techniques. Residue studies reveal traces of materials once placed upon artifacts. Landscape archaeology recreates environments experienced by prehistoric communities. Each discovery strengthens understanding while simultaneously exposing fresh questions. The tablets remain at the center of this ongoing investigation. Ironically, their greatest contribution may not be what they reveal directly. Instead, they remind researchers to remain cautious whenever discussing humanity's beginnings. Perhaps writing emerged gradually through many forgotten experiments. Perhaps several cultures independently explored symbolic recording long before complete writing systems became established. Perhaps the distinction between art, ritual, memory, and language was once far less rigid than modern definitions suggest. 3 modest pieces of clay continue inviting these possibilities. Their surfaces remain unchanged. The carved symbols wait exactly as they did thousands of years ago. Patient, silent, unwilling to explain themselves. Somewhere beneath Romania's fields, countless undiscovered settlements may still rest undisturbed, preserving objects that could reshape this entire discussion. Another tablet, another sequence of symbols, another forgotten archive sealed beneath ancient soil. Until discoveries like these emerge, the Tărtăria tablets remain suspended between certainty and mystery, small enough to hold in one hand, yet carrying questions vast enough to challenge everything we think we know about the first written thoughts of humankind. Beneath the quiet streets of the English market town of Royston, Hertfordshire, a narrow shaft descends into darkness. From above, there is little to suggest that anything unusual lies below. Shops, roads, and centuries of ordinary life have long surrounded the site. Yet, several meters beneath the surface, hidden inside solid chalk, waits a chamber unlike any other in Britain. Its walls are covered with figures. Saints emerge from the stone. Crosses overlap weathered carvings. Human faces stare through centuries of erosion. Animals, symbols, and mysterious patterns blend together until it becomes difficult to distinguish decoration from message. No inscription explains their purpose. No document records who created them. The cave simply exists, silent, concealed, and unexpectedly elaborate. Known today as Royston Cave, this underground chamber has puzzled historians, archaeologists, and curious visitors ever since its accidental discovery in the 18th century. More than 200 years of investigation have produced numerous theories, yet remarkably few certainties. The mystery begins with the cave itself. Unlike a natural cavern shaped by flowing water, Royston Cave was carefully excavated by human hands. Carved directly into soft chalk, it forms a roughly bell-shaped chamber approximately 8 meters high. A narrow, vertical shaft originally connected the chamber to the surface, suggesting that entry may once have been possible only from directly above. The proportions feel intentional. Every curve appears carefully planned. The chamber narrows toward the ceiling while widening near its base, creating an enclosed space unlike ordinary cellars or storage pits. Around its walls, dozens of carvings emerge beneath centuries of wear. Some remain surprisingly recognizable. Others survive only as faint outlines softened by time. Together, they create an atmosphere unlike that of an ordinary archaeological site. It feels less like entering a cave than stepping into a forgotten sanctuary. The cave was rediscovered in 1742 during construction work in the town's marketplace. According to contemporary accounts, workers clearing ground uncovered the opening of a vertical shaft sealed beneath a heavy millstone. As excavation continued, the hidden chamber gradually revealed itself below. Imagine that first descent. Only lantern light illuminated the walls. Dust filled the air. The carvings slowly emerged from darkness, one after another. For those present, it must have seemed as though an entirely forgotten chapter of history had suddenly reopened beneath their feet. Almost immediately, questions began. Who built this chamber? Why was it hidden? And why had knowledge of its existence disappeared completely? One of the most striking features is the extraordinary collection of carved figures decorating the walls. Several appear to represent Christian saints. Among the most recognizable is a large image widely interpreted as Saint Christopher carrying the Christ child across water. Nearby, another carving resembles Saint Catherine, traditionally associated with a wheel. Other figures have been identified as Saint Lawrence, Saint George, or various female saints, although many identifications remain uncertain because erosion has obscured important details. Crosses appear repeatedly throughout the chamber. Some resemble familiar medieval forms. Others seem more abstract. Several carvings overlap one another, suggesting that different images may have been created at different times. The walls preserve not a single artistic moment, but perhaps generations of activity. Dating the carvings has proven remarkably difficult. Unlike organic materials, chalk cannot be directly dated through conventional radiocarbon analysis. Researchers therefore rely upon artistic style, historical context, tool marks, and comparisons with other medieval carvings. Most specialists believe the chamber was probably created sometime between the 12th and 14th centuries, although the precise date remains uncertain. If correct, the cave belonged to medieval England, a period shaped by religious devotion, pilgrimage, political upheaval, and changing patterns of settlement. Yet, certainty remains elusive. No contemporary document clearly describes its construction. No medieval record confidently identifies its purpose. Even local traditions remain strangely silent. The cave simply appears beneath history, already forgotten. One mainstream interpretation proposes that Royston Cave served as a religious chapel or hermitage. The carved saints certainly support this possibility. Throughout medieval Europe, small underground chapels occasionally provided places for private devotion, prayer, or contemplation. A solitary religious figure, a hermit seeking separation from ordinary life, might have occupied such a space. The enclosed chamber, isolated from sunlight and everyday distraction, would certainly encourage reflection. Within such darkness, flickering candlelight would transform the carved figures into living presences. Shadows would move across the walls, faces would appear and disappear. The entire chamber would become part of the ritual experience. Another possibility suggests connections with pilgrimage. Royston occupied an important location where major medieval roads intersected. Travelers frequently passed through the town while journeying between religious destinations. Perhaps the cave offered pilgrims a sacred stopping place. A hidden chapel beneath the marketplace may have possessed special symbolic meaning, representing humility, withdrawal, or preparation before continuing a spiritual journey. Again, the evidence remains suggestive rather than conclusive. Then there is perhaps the most famous theory of all. For generations, speculation has linked Royston Cave with the Knights Templar. The Templars were among medieval Europe's most influential military and religious orders. Established during the early 12th century, they became renowned as protectors of Christian pilgrims traveling to the Holy Land. Over time, they accumulated extraordinary wealth, political influence, and extensive landholdings across Europe. England contained several important Templar properties. Interestingly, Royston itself stood near lands historically associated with the order. This geographical connection has naturally encouraged speculation. Some observers point to certain carved crosses that resemble forms occasionally associated with the Templars. Others argue that the chamber's secrecy fits popular images surrounding the order. Could Royston Cave have served as a private Templar chapel? A meeting place? A ceremonial chamber? Perhaps even a secure repository? These ideas possess undeniable appeal. The Knights Templar have become deeply intertwined with countless historical mysteries, ranging from hidden treasures to lost archives. Yet, when the available evidence is examined carefully, the picture becomes far less certain. Mainstream historians emphasize that no contemporary documents connect the Templars directly with the cave. No surviving records describe its construction. No archaeological discoveries within the chamber definitively identify Templar occupation. While the possibility cannot be entirely excluded, neither can it presently be confirmed. The theory remains intriguing precisely because it rests within that uncertain space where history becomes difficult to reconstruct. Other researchers propose less dramatic but equally fascinating explanations. Perhaps the cave functioned as a meeting place for local religious guilds. Medieval towns often supported organizations dedicated to particular saints or charitable activities. Members gathered regularly for worship, fellowship, and community service. A decorated underground chamber might have provided an intimate setting for such gatherings. Others suggest the cave may have served as a storage chamber later adapted for devotional purposes. Architecture often changes over time. Buildings acquire new functions. Sacred spaces become ordinary. Ordinary spaces become sacred. Royston Cave may preserve multiple chapters layered upon one another. The carvings themselves encourage close attention. Unlike polished sculptures created for cathedrals, these figures possess remarkable directness. Tool marks remain visible. Lines appear confident but not overly refined. Some images seem unfinished. Others display later additions carved over earlier surfaces. The walls resemble a conversation unfolding across generations, rather than a single, carefully planned artistic program. Who created them? Professional craftsmen, local monks, ordinary townspeople, traveling pilgrims? No one can answer with confidence. Perhaps many different hands contributed. Perhaps each generation added its own images. Perhaps certain carvings marked important events now completely forgotten. Another subtle mystery concerns the cave's geometry. Its carefully shaped interior appears almost symmetrical. The vertical shaft descends directly toward the center of the chamber. Was this simply practical engineering, or did the design carry symbolic meaning? Across many cultures, descending underground represents transition. Caves become places of reflection, transformation, burial, rebirth. Religious traditions repeatedly associate underground spaces with encounters beyond ordinary experience. Whether Royston Cave intentionally embraced such symbolism remains impossible to determine. Nevertheless, the atmosphere continues affecting nearly everyone who enters. Silence behaves differently underground. Sound softens. Time becomes strangely difficult to measure. Without windows, the outside world disappears completely. Only stone remains, and the figures watching quietly from every direction. Some researchers have also considered whether traces of medieval pigments once covered the carvings. Although little color survives today, it is entirely possible that many figures originally appeared vividly painted. Imagine entering the chamber illuminated by candles. Red robes, blue garments, golden halos, black shadows dancing across textured chalk walls. The experience would have differed dramatically from the pale carvings visible today. Centuries gradually erased those colors, leaving only outlines behind. The disappearance of color transformed certainty into ambiguity. Every weathered figure now invites interpretation. Naturally, more unconventional theories have flourished. Some writers suggest the cave predates the medieval period entirely, proposing that later Christian carvings merely reused a much older sacred site. According to these ideas, prehistoric communities may already have regarded the location as spiritually important long before medieval builders arrived. Others imagine forgotten ceremonial traditions continuing beneath the surface despite changing religious beliefs. At present, archaeological evidence supporting such claims remains limited. The visible carvings overwhelmingly reflect medieval Christian iconography. Still, underground spaces often possess long histories. One generation discovers what another abandoned. Sacred places rarely remain fixed forever. Another fringe interpretation proposes that the chamber concealed valuable objects following the suppression of the Knights Templar in the early 14th century. When the order was dissolved, legends quickly spread regarding hidden treasures, sacred relics, and lost archives supposedly concealed throughout Europe. Royston Cave occasionally enters these stories as one possible hiding place. Despite careful investigation, however, no convincing archaeological evidence has confirmed the presence of hidden treasure or secret chambers beneath the cave itself. The legend persists because mystery invites imagination. Perhaps the greatest fascination lies not in hidden gold, but in hidden memory. How does an entire underground chamber disappear from local knowledge? Medieval towns were vibrant communities. Markets bustled. Church bells rang. Generations lived, worked, and died within remarkably small geographical areas. Yet, somehow, knowledge of this chamber faded until its accidental rediscovery centuries later. Perhaps the entrance became deliberately sealed. Perhaps changing town development gradually concealed it. Perhaps political upheaval, religious reform, disease, or simple passage of time erased collective memory one generation at a time. History often vanishes quietly rather than dramatically. People forget. Buildings collapse. Roads shift. Names disappear. The earth patiently preserves what memory cannot. Modern archaeological investigations continue examining the cave with increasingly sophisticated techniques. Laser scanning records microscopic details of the carvings. Digital imaging reveals weathered features invisible to the naked eye. Historical research compares artistic styles across medieval England. Every new method contributes another small piece to the puzzle. Yet, the essential questions remain remarkably unchanged from those first asked in 1742. Who carved these figures? Why here? Why underground? Why was the chamber ultimately abandoned? The cave offers fragments, never complete answers. Perhaps that is precisely why it continues capturing imagination. Unlike many archaeological discoveries explained through a single convincing theory, Royston Cave resists closure. Religious devotion explains much, yet not everything. The Templar hypothesis attracts attention, yet lacks decisive proof. Practical purposes remain possible, though incomplete. Every explanation illuminates one part of the chamber while leaving another in shadow. And perhaps that balance between knowledge and uncertainty is exactly what makes the site so compelling. The carved saints remain motionless. The crosses remain silent. Centuries pass overhead, while the chalk walls preserve their quiet testimony. Beneath an ordinary English town, an extraordinary chamber continues waiting, much as it has for hundreds of years. Whether it was shaped by solitary devotion, forgotten ceremonies, medieval brotherhoods, or purposes that history has not yet recovered, its walls still hold more questions than answers. And somewhere beneath those weathered carvings, beneath every layer of chalk and silence, there may still be details waiting for someone willing to look a little closer. The Danube moves with quiet determination, cutting through steep cliffs where the Balkans meet the Carpathian Mountains. Here, the river narrows into the dramatic landscape known as the Iron Gates Gorge, one of Europe's most striking natural corridors. Towering rock walls rise above deep currents, while mist often settles across the water during the early morning hours. Even today, the place feels ancient, as though the landscape itself remembers events long forgotten by history. Along one stretch of this remarkable river once stood a prehistoric settlement unlike any other. Its name is Lepenski Vir. At first glance, the site appears surprisingly modest. There are no massive temples reaching toward the sky, no colossal statues, and no elaborate fortifications. Instead, the settlement consists of carefully planned homes arranged in distinctive trapezoidal shapes overlooking the river. Stone floors, hearths, and carefully organized living spaces reveal a community that understood architecture with remarkable sophistication. Yet, it is not the houses alone that have captivated archaeologists. Scattered among them were extraordinary stone sculptures. Faces emerged from rounded river boulders. Wide eyes, broad noses, curved mouths, features that seem at once human and strangely unfamiliar. These remarkable carvings have become known as the Lepenski Vir Boulder faces. No written language survives to explain them. No myths remain. No names accompany their silent expressions. Only stone has endured. The site came to widespread archaeological attention during the 1960s, just before the construction of a major hydroelectric project threatened to flood parts of the Iron Gates region. Faced with the approaching waters, archaeologists launched extensive rescue excavations. Their work revealed one of the most significant Mesolithic settlements ever discovered in Europe. The timing was fortunate. Had the excavations begun only a little later, much of the evidence might have disappeared beneath the rising waters of the Danube forever. The settlement dates from approximately 9,500 to 6,000 BC, spanning an extraordinary period during which human societies gradually transitioned from mobile hunter-gatherer lifestyles toward more settled communities. Lepenski occupied a unique moment in history, standing at the intersection of profound cultural change. Its inhabitants depended heavily upon the river. Fish, particularly enormous sturgeon migrating through the Danube, formed an essential part of daily life. Animal bones, fishing equipment, hearths, and food remains all point toward a community intimately connected with the rhythms of the water. Every season brought change. Every migration mattered. The river was not simply a source of food, it shaped the entire world. Perhaps it even shaped belief itself. The architecture immediately surprised researchers. Unlike temporary camps commonly associated with hunter-gatherer societies, the homes at Lepenski display careful planning and remarkable consistency. Many follow similar trapezoidal layouts oriented toward the river. Stone-paved floors were constructed with impressive precision, while central hearths occupied prominent positions within each dwelling. Such organization suggested permanence, or at least repeated return over many generations. These people were not merely passing through, they belonged here. Within several of these structures, archaeologists discovered the remarkable sandstone sculptures that would eventually become symbols of the site itself. Each boulder had originally been shaped by the flowing waters of the Danube. Ancient craftspeople selected these naturally rounded stones before carefully carving facial features into their surfaces. Some sculptures possess unmistakably human characteristics. Others appear almost fish-like. Large eyes dominate many faces. Broad mouths curve gently beneath flattened noses. Certain figures seem calm. Others appear almost watchful. A few seem strangely alive despite thousands of years of silence. No two are exactly alike. Yet all share an unmistakable artistic tradition. The first question naturally concerns identity. Who or what do these faces represent? The mainstream archaeological interpretation connects the sculptures with the unique relationship between the inhabitants of Lepenski and the Danube River. Many researchers observe that several carvings combine human and fish-like characteristics. Their broad mouths and elongated faces bear subtle resemblance to large river fish, particularly sturgeon, which played an important role within the local economy. Perhaps these were river spirits, protective beings, mythological ancestors, or symbolic expressions of humanity's dependence upon the waters that sustained life. Across many cultures, rivers become far more than geographical features. They are pathways, boundaries, sources of abundance, places where life and death intersect. Communities living beside powerful rivers often develop belief systems deeply intertwined with flowing water. The sculptures of Lepenski may represent precisely such a tradition. Interestingly, many of the carved boulders were discovered inside houses rather than separate ceremonial buildings. This detail raises fascinating possibilities. Perhaps sacred imagery belonged within everyday life rather than isolated temples. The boundary between domestic activity and spiritual practice may have been far less distinct than modern assumptions suggest. Imagine entering one of these homes nearly 9,000 years ago. A fire burns quietly at the center. Smoke rises toward the roof. Family members prepare food gathered from the river. Against one wall rests a carefully carved stone face watching silently over the household. Was it an ancestor, a guardian, a representation of the river itself, or something whose meaning has disappeared completely? The archaeological evidence cannot answer directly. Yet, the placement of the sculptures suggests they mattered deeply to those who lived among them. Another remarkable feature of Lepenski concerns its astonishing level of planning. The settlement appears carefully organized according to geometric principles. Researchers have noted recurring architectural proportions within the trapezoidal house foundations. Some scholars argue that these layouts reflect sophisticated mathematical understanding. Others suggest the patterns emerged naturally through practical construction techniques repeated across generations. Whatever the explanation, the consistency is striking. Order seems to permeate the settlement. Architecture, art, spatial organization. Nothing appears entirely accidental. This impression encourages broader questions. How complex were Mesolithic societies truly? For many years, hunter-gatherer communities were often portrayed as relatively simple groups moving continuously across the landscape. Sites like Lepenski challenge that image. Here was a community displaying architectural planning, artistic achievement, long-term settlement, and apparently sophisticated symbolic traditions thousands of years before agriculture became widespread in the region. Complexity clearly existed long before cities. The sculptures themselves demonstrate impressive craftsmanship. Working sandstone using stone tools requires patience and considerable skill. Facial features had to be carefully shaped without splitting the rock. Subtle curves were produced through repeated controlled strikes. The resulting expressions possess remarkable individuality despite their stylized appearance. Even modern viewers often experience an immediate emotional response. The faces seem strangely familiar, almost recognizable. Anthropologists sometimes describe this phenomenon as the human tendency to perceive personality through facial features, even when artistic styles differ dramatically across cultures. Yet, the Lepenski sculptures evoke something more difficult to define. They seem suspended between realism and abstraction, neither entirely human nor entirely symbolic. Perhaps intentionally so. One interpretation proposes that the sculptures represent ancestors. Ancestor veneration appears throughout countless ancient societies. The dead remain spiritually present. Their guidance continues. Their memory shapes community identity. Placing ancestral images within homes would create an ongoing relationship between living families and those who came before. The river, constantly flowing beside the settlement, would reinforce ideas of continuity and renewal. Another possibility focuses upon transformation. Many traditional belief systems describe boundaries between humans and animals as more fluid than modern perspectives often allow. Hunters observe animals closely. They imitate movement, wear skins, adopt symbolic identities during ceremonies. The fish-like qualities visible in certain Lepenski sculptures may reflect this broader worldview. Perhaps the carvings depict beings existing between worlds, neither fully human nor fully animal. Instead, they express relationships rather than categories. Such interpretations remain speculative. Yet, they arise from patterns documented across many cultures rather than fantasy alone. The settlement also contains carefully arranged burials. Some individuals were interred beneath house floors, reinforcing the impression that domestic and spiritual life existed side by side. Living families shared space with ancestral memory. Homes became places where generations remained connected despite death. Within such a setting, carved stone faces may have served multiple roles simultaneously: religious, familial, protective, commemorative. Modern categories may simply be too narrow to capture ancient meanings. The Iron Gates landscape itself contributes powerfully to the mystery. Towering cliffs surround the river. Echoes travel across the water. Seasonal fog obscures distant shorelines. Large fish once migrated through the gorge in extraordinary numbers. For communities living here, the environment must have inspired profound respect. Nature was not scenery. It was presence. One can easily imagine myths emerging from such a landscape. river beings dwelling beneath the current, ancestors traveling with migrating fish, mountains observing silently from above. Whether these particular beliefs existed at Lepenski Vir remains unknown. Yet, the sculptures suggest that imagination and observation were deeply intertwined. As archaeological techniques advanced, researchers uncovered increasingly detailed evidence about daily life at the site. Microscopic analysis revealed food preparation practices. Stable isotope studies demonstrated the overwhelming importance of river fish within local diets. Radiocarbon dating refined the settlement's chronology. Ancient DNA provided insights into population relationships during Europe's Mesolithic period. Each discovery strengthened understanding while simultaneously revealing new complexities. Lepenski Vir occupied a fascinating crossroads. Communities practicing traditional hunting and fishing encountered incoming farming populations expanding gradually across southeastern Europe. Cultural exchange almost certainly occurred. Ideas moved alongside people. Technologies spread. Beliefs evolved. The settlement records one chapter within this immense transformation. Did the sculptures change meaning during these centuries? Were new figures added as old traditions adapted? Archaeology offers hints. Rarely certainty. Naturally, the unusual appearance of the Boulder faces has inspired more unconventional interpretations as well. Some independent writers describe them as representations of forgotten deities whose identities vanished with prehistoric belief systems. Others imagine survivals of an even older symbolic tradition stretching back into the Ice Age. A few propose that the faces preserve memories of unknown civilizations whose influence extended across ancient Europe long before recorded history. These ideas capture imagination because the sculptures appear so distinctive. Yet, no convincing archaeological evidence presently supports such far-reaching conclusions. The mainstream interpretation that the carvings emerged from the cultural traditions of the Lepenski Vir community itself remains the most strongly supported by available evidence. Still, support for one explanation does not eliminate mystery. Even when archaeologists broadly agree upon cultural context, intention often remains beyond recovery. Science can identify the sandstone, date the settlement, reconstruct diet, analyze burial practices, but it cannot recover a whispered prayer. It cannot reveal the story a parent told a child while pointing toward one of the carved faces. It cannot restore the myths carried by voices that disappeared thousands of years ago. Those remain beyond excavation. Perhaps that is why the sculptures continue exerting such quiet fascination. Unlike monumental statues celebrating kings or rulers, these faces belong to ordinary communities, people who fished, cooked meals, raised families, watched the river. Yet, they invested time and skill creating images whose purpose still escapes complete explanation. The mystery feels deeply human, not because it concerns supernatural claims or hidden treasures, but because it reminds us how much of human experience leaves almost no trace. Belief, memory, identity, hope, fear. These rarely fossilize. Instead, they survive only indirectly through objects like the Lepenski Vir Boulder faces. The Danube continues flowing exactly as it did thousands of years ago. Its waters no longer carry the immense migrations of prehistoric sturgeon in the same numbers, yet the current still passes the place where these remarkable sculptures once overlooked the river. Their expressions remain unchanged, watching silently across generations that could never have imagined the modern world. Whether they portray ancestors, river spirits, sacred protectors, or meanings entirely beyond our understanding, they continue inviting the same quiet question that has echoed through archaeology for decades. When ancient hands carved living faces into stone, what exactly were they hoping future eyes would one day see, and what might still lie waiting beneath the riverbank? where the Danube has guarded its oldest secrets for nearly 10,000 years. The limestone is smooth from countless centuries of silence. At first glance, it appears almost abstract, its rounded surfaces revealing little to an unfamiliar eye. There are no finely carved faces, no elaborate clothing, no decorative patterns announcing its purpose. Instead, the sculpture seems to conceal its meaning, inviting the viewer to turn it slowly, allowing light and shadow to reveal what is hidden within its form. Gradually, two figures begin to emerge. One body curves toward another. Arms seem to intertwine. Legs fold together. What first appeared to be a single shape transforms into two human beings locked in a close embrace. It is an image both ancient and unexpectedly familiar. Known today as the Sakhri lover's figurine, this remarkable artifact is widely regarded as one of the oldest known representations of human intimacy ever discovered. Though small enough to fit comfortably in the palm of a hand, it carries questions reaching far beyond its modest size. It asks not only how ancient people lived, but how they loved. The figurine takes its modern name from Ain Sakhri, a cave in the Judean desert of Palestine, where it was reportedly discovered during the 20th century. The surrounding landscape is one of striking contrasts. Dry valleys cut through pale limestone hills. Rocky cliffs overlook winding paths shaped by wind and time. Rain falls only occasionally, yet generations of people found ways to survive within this demanding environment long before written history began. Today, the desert feels quiet. But thousands of years ago, these hills formed part of a changing world. The last ice age had ended. The climate gradually became warmer. Wild cereals spread across the landscape. Communities of hunter-gatherers began experimenting with increasingly permanent settlements. Human history stood on the threshold of enormous transformation. The Ain Sakhri figurine belongs to the Natufian culture, generally dated between approximately 12,500 and 9,500 BC. The Natufians occupy a remarkable place in archaeology because they lived during the transition between fully mobile hunting societies and the earliest experiments with permanent villages. For generations, they gathered wild grains, hunted gazelle, collected fruits and nuts, built substantial stone dwellings, buried their dead with careful ceremony. Their world bridged two great chapters of human existence. They remained hunter-gatherers. Yet they were also becoming something new. Archaeological discoveries across Palestine reveal communities displaying increasing social complexity long before agriculture became fully established. Stone houses, grinding tools, ornaments, decorated objects, and carefully prepared burials suggest societies developing deeper connections to particular places. People returned, built, remembered, belonged. Within this cultural landscape, the Ain Sakhri figurine quietly emerged. Unlike many prehistoric sculptures emphasizing exaggerated anatomical features or symbolic abstraction, this piece captures movement. The two bodies appear inseparable. Their forms merge into a single flowing composition. Viewed from one angle, the sculpture appears almost completely abstract. Rotate it slightly, and human figures suddenly become unmistakable. This remarkable ambiguity has fascinated archaeologists, artists, and historians alike. The sculptor achieved extraordinary complexity through remarkable simplicity. Only a few carefully shaped curves transform ordinary stone into living emotion. No names accompany the figures. No inscription explains the scene. The sculpture speaks entirely through form. Its interpretation begins with careful observation. Many researchers agree that the figurine most likely depicts two people engaged in an intimate embrace. Their posture strongly suggests physical closeness rather than conflict or ceremony alone. Because of this, the sculpture is frequently described as humanity's earliest known artistic representation of sexual intimacy. If this interpretation is correct, its significance extends well beyond archaeology. It reminds us that emotional relationships formed part of human experience long before cities, kingdoms, or written language appeared. Love leaves few archaeological traces. Affection rarely survives excavation. Stone tools endure. Buildings remain. Bones persist. But tenderness almost always disappears. The Sakhri figurine may represent one of the rare moments when emotion itself became fossilized through art. Yet, even this widely accepted interpretation invites further questions. Were the figures intended to portray specific individuals? A married couple? Mythological ancestors? Fertility itself? Or perhaps an idea rather than identifiable people? The sculpture never answers directly. Some archaeologists associate the figurine with fertility and reproduction, themes commonly explored throughout prehistoric art. Across many ancient societies, images connected with birth, family, and continuity occupied important symbolic roles. Communities dependent upon successful hunting and seasonal resources naturally valued fertility in both people and animals. Life depended upon renewal. Children represented the future. Successful reproduction ensured survival. From this perspective, the sculpture may have functioned as more than artistic expression. Perhaps it formed part of ceremonies connected with marriage, conception, or community identity. Perhaps it accompanied important rites marking transitions within family life. Again, certainty remains impossible. The object survives. Its context does not. Unlike carefully excavated modern discoveries, details surrounding the figurine's original archaeological context remain incomplete. This absence complicates interpretation considerably. Context often provides archaeology's strongest evidence. Where was an object placed? What surrounded it? Was it buried deliberately, displayed openly, carried regularly? Without these details, even remarkable artifacts preserve only fragments of their original story. Still, the craftsmanship itself reveals important clues. The sculptor selected calcite, a material soft enough to shape yet durable enough to survive thousands of years. Every curve appears intentional. There is little unnecessary detail. Instead of emphasizing facial features or elaborate clothing, the artist focused entirely upon posture and connection. The emotional relationship matters more than individual identity. This artistic choice feels surprisingly modern. Many later civilizations celebrated rulers, warriors, or gods through highly detailed sculpture. The Sakhri figurine does something different. It celebrates relationship. Two people become one composition. Neither dominates the other. Their identities merge within shared movement. Some art historians have described this as one of the earliest examples of abstraction in human sculpture. Rather than reproducing physical appearance precisely, the artist captured an idea: connection, closeness, union. The result possesses extraordinary emotional power despite its simplicity. Perhaps because simplicity allows every generation to discover its own meaning. The Natufian world itself provides fascinating context. These communities occupied an unusual position in human history. For countless generations, people had lived primarily as highly mobile hunter-gatherers. Now, gradual environmental changes encouraged longer occupation of favorable locations. Stone houses appeared. Grinding stones processed increasing quantities of wild cereals. Dogs may already have formed close relationships with human communities. Burial practices became increasingly elaborate. Art expanded, symbolic expression flourished. The Sakhri figurine emerged during precisely this period of transition. Could changing patterns of settlement also have transformed ideas about family, about partnership, about community? Archaeologists continue exploring these possibilities. Longer residence in permanent settlements often strengthens social relationships. Communities become more stable. Generations remain together. Shared identity deepens. Perhaps artistic attention naturally shifted toward interpersonal bonds. Perhaps the sculpture reflects changing understandings of human connection during one of history's greatest cultural transformations. The figurine's compact size introduces another intriguing possibility. Unlike monumental sculpture intended for public display, this object could easily have been carried, held, hidden, passed between individuals. Its intimate scale suggests equally intimate use. Was it a cherished personal possession, a ceremonial object, a gift exchanged between families, a sacred symbol viewed only during particular occasions? Modern archaeology cannot determine its precise role, yet its dimensions encourage imagination. Someone once held this sculpture exactly as museum visitors see it today. Warm hands touched the same smooth surfaces. Fingers traced the same curves. The distance between ancient maker and modern observer suddenly feels surprisingly small. Naturally, the figurine has also inspired more speculative interpretations. Some independent writers suggest the sculpture encodes forgotten spiritual teachings centered upon sacred union between masculine and feminine principles. Others propose that it represents deities whose identities disappeared long before recorded mythology. A few even argue that the intertwined figures preserve fragments of symbolic traditions inherited from civilizations far older than the Natufian culture itself. Such ideas remain speculative. The available archaeological evidence provides no direct support for these interpretations. Yet their persistence reflects something undeniable about the sculpture. It possesses unusual emotional resonance. People instinctively search for meaning within it, perhaps because the figures seem simultaneously familiar and mysterious. Another fascinating question concerns artistic intention. Why create abstraction at all? Naturalistic representation certainly existed in prehistoric art. Animals painted inside caves often display remarkable realism. Yet here, the sculptor deliberately simplified human anatomy into flowing forms. Recognition requires careful observation. The artwork reveals itself gradually. Was this intentional? Perhaps the sculpture rewarded those already familiar with its meaning. Perhaps discovery formed part of the experience itself. The image does not immediately announce its subject. Instead, it invites participation. Only patience reveals the embrace. This subtle quality distinguishes the Sakhri figurine from many prehistoric objects. It whispers rather than declares. The broader archaeological record of the Natufian culture reinforces impressions of considerable symbolic sophistication. Decorated stone bowls, carved bone objects, personal ornaments fashioned from shells and animal teeth, carefully prepared burials containing flowers or grave goods. These discoveries suggest communities investing significant energy in symbolic life beyond immediate survival. They created beauty, memory, identity. The lover's figurine belongs naturally within this creative world. Science continues revealing increasingly detailed insights into Natufian society. Ancient DNA studies reconstruct population relationships. Microscopic analysis identifies plant processing techniques. Residue studies examine food preparation. Environmental reconstruction recreates landscapes inhabited more than 11,000 years ago. Each technological advance sharpens historical understanding. Yet, one aspect remains forever beyond laboratory analysis: emotion. science can determine the age of the sculpture, its material, its manufacturing techniques, its cultural affiliation. But it cannot reveal what the sculptor felt while shaping those two intertwined forms. Was the work inspired by observation, memory, hope, grief, celebration? No instrument can measure affection preserved within stone. Perhaps that explains why the Sakhri figurine continues captivating viewers across cultures and generations. It reminds us that prehistoric people were not distant abstractions living unimaginably different lives. They experienced relationships, attachment, loss, joy. The same emotional landscapes continue shaping humanity today. Technologies change, languages disappear, civilizations rise and fall, yet certain experiences remain astonishingly constant. The sculpture quietly bridges thousands of years without requiring translation. Its silence becomes universal. Some archaeologists caution against projecting modern concepts of romantic love onto prehistoric societies. This caution is important. Ancient social structures differed greatly from those familiar today. Marriage, kinship, spirituality, and community relationships likely followed patterns difficult to reconstruct fully. Even so, physical closeness clearly carried meaning. The sculptor chose to preserve precisely that moment. Not hunting, not conflict, not authority, connection. That decision alone speaks volumes. Across museums and research institutions, the figurine continues inviting fresh interpretation. Each generation asks slightly different questions. Some focus upon gender, others upon symbolism, others upon social organization or artistic innovation. Remarkably, the sculpture accommodates them all without surrendering its deepest mystery. Perhaps that is the greatest achievement of its anonymous creator. More than 11,000 years later, the artwork remains alive. Not because it provides answers, but because it continues asking timeless questions about what it means to be human. The limestone still holds its quiet embrace. Its surfaces remain smooth beneath modern light, just as they once rested beneath ancient hands. Somewhere among the hills and caves of Palestine, beneath layers of earth that have not yet been disturbed, other objects from the Natufian world may still lie, waiting in silence. They may reveal new stories about the people who first settled these landscapes, or they may deepen the mystery even further. Until then, the Sakhri lover's figurine remains one of archaeology's most intimate whispers from the distant past, inviting us to wonder whether the oldest human story preserved in stone is not one of conquest or survival, but simply of two people choosing to hold one another close. Along the rugged coast of Brittany, where powerful Atlantic waves strike weathered cliffs with relentless rhythm, a solitary rock overlooks the sea. Salt-laden winds sweep across the shoreline, carrying the cries of seabirds above dark waters that have witnessed countless voyages, storms, and disappearances. The landscape feels timeless. Every tide erases footprints, yet the cliffs themselves continue preserving memories far older than living generations. Hidden among these rocks is an inscription that has challenged historians for centuries. At first glance, it appears almost ordinary. Letters, numbers, scattered words, fragments of sentences. Yet, the more closely it is examined, the more confusing it becomes. The carved text refuses to reveal its meaning. Known today as the Plougastel-Daoulas inscription stone, it remains one of France's most intriguing, undeciphered historical puzzles. Unlike ancient scripts lost to prehistory, this inscription was created during a period when writing was already widespread across Europe. The letters themselves are recognizable. The problem lies elsewhere. The message seems almost readable, yet it continues to resist complete understanding. The inscription is carved into a large granite outcrop, overlooking the entrance to a sheltered bay near the town of Plougastel-Daoulas in Brittany. Its location is striking. Accessible only during low tide or by careful approach along the rocky shoreline, the stone occupies a place where land, sea, and weather meet continuously. The ocean has shaped every surface. Salt slowly softens the carved grooves. Wind carries fine grains of sand across the granite. Each passing century gradually erases details that may once have appeared perfectly clear. Perhaps that erosion is part of the mystery itself. The inscription consists of several lines of text carved directly into the rock. Around 20 lines remain partially visible, though many letters have been damaged beyond recognition. Some characters resemble ordinary Latin letters. Others appear unusual, abbreviated, or distorted. Numbers including the dates 1786 and 1787 are clearly visible, suggesting that at least portions of the inscription belong to the late 18th century. These dates immediately distinguish the stone from many archaeological mysteries. This is not a relic from prehistory, not a forgotten civilization, not an unknown script. Instead, it comes from a relatively recent historical period, and yet no one has been able to produce a universally accepted translation. That paradox alone has fascinated researchers for generations. How can a message written only a few centuries ago remain effectively unreadable? Part of the answer lies in Brittany itself. For centuries, this coastal region preserved a rich linguistic heritage distinct from much of France. Breton, a Celtic language closely related to Cornish and Welsh, remained widely spoken throughout the region. Local dialects evolved independently across different communities, while spelling conventions often varied considerably before modern standardization. As a result, historical inscriptions from Brittany occasionally contain unfamiliar combinations of words, abbreviations, or regional expressions difficult for later readers to interpret. The Plougastel-Daoulas inscription appears to reflect precisely this complexity. Many scholars believe the text combines elements of Breton with French, while incorporating abbreviations, local spellings, and weathered passages now impossible to reconstruct fully. In other words, the problem may not be that the language is unknown. Rather, too much information has disappeared. Imagine reading a modern sentence after centuries of erosion. Entire words vanish. Letters blur together. Fragments remain. Meaning begins slipping away. The inscription preserves exactly that experience. Researchers have identified recognizable elements scattered throughout the text. The dates stand out clearly. Certain names appear possible. Several isolated words resemble Breton vocabulary, yet complete sentences remain frustratingly incomplete. Every proposed translation encounters missing pieces. This uncertainty has inspired decades of investigation. Historians, linguists, archaeologists, local scholars, and amateur enthusiasts have all attempted to solve the puzzle. Each interpretation explains certain sections. None explains everything. One widely accepted theory suggests that the inscription commemorates a tragic event connected with the nearby coastline. Brittany has always maintained a close relationship with the sea. Fishing communities depended upon unpredictable Atlantic waters. Storms claimed countless vessels. Shipwrecks formed an unavoidable part of coastal life. Perhaps the inscription records the loss of sailors. A memorial carved directly into stone where the tragedy occurred. Several researchers have pointed toward words potentially associated with mourning, remembrance, or names of individuals involved in such an event. If correct, the inscription becomes deeply human. A permanent message intended to preserve memory against the relentless erosion of time. Ironically, time itself gradually erased that memory anyway. Another possibility connects the inscription with military activity. During the late 18th century, Brittany occupied an important strategic position along the French coast. Coastal fortifications expanded as European powers competed for naval influence. Nearby batteries overlooked the sea. Soldiers stationed along the coast frequently carved graffiti, names, dates, and personal messages into stone surfaces. Could the inscription represent the work of military personnel? Some historians believe this explanation deserves serious consideration. Certain names visible within the carving may correspond to individuals connected with local military installations. Yet, significant difficulties remain. The sheer complexity of the inscription exceeds ordinary graffiti. It appears deliberate, organized, lengthy. Someone invested considerable effort creating it. Another intriguing aspect concerns the location itself. Why carve such an elaborate message onto a rock exposed to wind, rain, and sea spray? Surely, easier surfaces existed nearby. The choice seems intentional. Perhaps visibility from the sea mattered. Perhaps the stone marked an important place already familiar to local communities. Or perhaps the location possessed symbolic significance now completely forgotten. Coastal landscapes often accumulate stories. Generations return to the same cliffs, the same harbors, the same fishing grounds. Memory becomes attached to geography. A particular rock may hold meaning impossible to recognize centuries later. The inscription encourages exactly these reflections. Every weathered line hints at knowledge once shared effortlessly among those who created it. Today, only fragments remain. Modern technology has transformed the investigation. High-resolution photography reveals shallow carvings invisible under ordinary lighting. Three-dimensional scanning captures microscopic surface details. Digital enhancement strengthens worn letter forms. Researchers compare historical dialects using linguistic databases unimaginable only decades ago. Each new method recovers additional clues, yet complete understanding continues to remain just beyond reach. Sometimes, improved technology sharpens mystery rather than solving it. The more carefully researchers examine the stone, the more apparent its complexity becomes. Certain letters appear intentionally abbreviated. Spacing varies unexpectedly. Some words seem incomplete even before erosion occurred. Did the original carver expect local readers to understand implied meanings? Quite possibly. Every community possesses shared knowledge requiring little explanation. Nicknames, local landmarks, family names, events remembered by everyone alive at the time. Such references rarely survive once the community itself changes. What appears mysterious today may once have been perfectly ordinary. This realization reminds us how fragile communication truly is. We often imagine writing as permanent. Words carved into stone seem especially durable. Yet, permanence depends upon context. Without shared language, shared history, and shared memory, even the clearest inscription eventually becomes uncertain. Stone survives. Meaning does not always survive alongside it. The Plougastel-Daoulas inscription demonstrates this beautifully. Another fascinating possibility concerns authorship. Was the inscription carved by one individual or multiple people working over several years? Close examination suggests varying depths and styles among certain sections. Some researchers propose that additions may have been made at different times. If true, the stone records an evolving conversation rather than a single message. Perhaps each generation added another layer, another name, another event, another memory. Over time, the entire composition became increasingly difficult even for contemporaries to interpret. History occasionally accumulates exactly this way, not through one grand narrative, but through countless small additions. Naturally, the undeciphered inscription has attracted more imaginative interpretations as well. Some independent writers suggest the message conceals hidden codes intended only for select readers. Others propose connections with secret societies active in 18th century Europe. A few imagine that the inscription preserves directions toward buried treasure concealed somewhere along the Breton coast. The dramatic landscape certainly encourages such speculation. Steep cliffs, hidden coves, sea caves, shipwreck legends. It is easy to understand why mystery thrives here. Yet no convincing evidence presently supports these more elaborate claims. The available historical record points more strongly toward an ordinary human purpose, whose precise details have simply faded through time. Ironically, that possibility may be even more compelling. Not every mystery requires extraordinary origins. Sometimes, ordinary lives disappear so completely that even their written words become enigmatic. The stone also raises broader questions about forgotten voices. History often celebrates kings, generals, explorers, and famous writers. Their documents survive within carefully preserved archives. Their names appear repeatedly across textbooks. But what of ordinary people? Fishermen, stonecutters, soldiers, families living beside the sea. Their histories frequently survive only through small traces. A carved name, a weathered date, an incomplete sentence. The Plougastel-Daoulas inscription belongs to that quieter history. It reminds us that countless personal stories once existed beyond official records. Some remain visible. Others have almost vanished. The Atlantic continues performing its slow work. Every storm reshapes the shoreline. Every winter brings fresh rain. Lichens spread across exposed surfaces. Salt crystals enter tiny fractures within the granite. The inscription grows slightly fainter each year. Conservation efforts now help preserve what remains, yet the natural processes shaping the coastline never truly stop. Time behaves differently beside the sea. Everything becomes temporary, even stone. Researchers continue returning to the site with fresh ideas. Historical archives reveal forgotten family names. Dialect specialists compare unusual spellings. Digital imaging uncovers previously overlooked characters. Occasionally, one small section becomes a little clearer. Another grows more uncertain. Progress occurs in fragments. The complete picture remains elusive. Perhaps that uncertainty explains the inscription's enduring appeal. Unlike fully translated historical documents, it leaves room for imagination without abandoning evidence. The letters unquestionably exist. The dates are real. The carving is authentic. The mystery lies only in interpretation. That balance encourages careful curiosity rather than sensational conclusions. Perhaps somewhere inside a forgotten archive in Brittany rests a diary mentioning the inscription. Perhaps an overlooked parish record preserves names matching those carved into the granite. Perhaps another weathered stone nearby once completed the message before centuries of erosion carried it away. Or perhaps the missing context has disappeared forever. The inscription itself seems almost aware of this possibility. Its fragmented words resemble voices struggling to cross an immense distance. Not merely centuries, but forgotten memory itself. Standing before the granite, one cannot help imagining the anonymous hands that once carved each letter with patient determination. Whoever created the inscription almost certainly believed their message would endure. In one sense, they were correct. The stone still remains, overlooking the Atlantic exactly as intended. Yet its meaning now drifts somewhere between history and silence, reminding us that survival alone is not enough. Even when words outlive the people who wrote them, they can still become strangers. And somewhere along Brittany's windswept coast, where waves continue wearing away ancient granite grain by grain, perhaps another forgotten inscription still waits beneath moss, sand, or tide, holding the missing piece of a story that has not been fully heard for more than 200 years. The Norwegian landscape unfolds beneath wide northern skies. Dense forests blanket gentle hills, while narrow valleys lead toward quiet lakes reflecting the changing seasons. During winter, snow softens every contour. In summer, long daylight lingers across fields where ancient farms have stood for generations. Beneath this peaceful countryside lies a landscape layered with forgotten lives, where every mound of earth may conceal traces of people who walked these valleys nearly 2,000 years ago. Near the village of Tyrifjord, at a place known as Svingerud, archaeologists uncovered one such trace. At first glance, it appears unremarkable, a block of reddish-brown sandstone. Its surface is rough, its edges are irregular. Unlike towering standing stones raised for public display, this fragment feels almost modest, as though it was never intended to dominate the landscape. Yet, across one face, delicate lines emerge. Short strokes intersect. Angular symbols appear one after another. Simple marks, carefully cut, quietly preserved beneath the soil for centuries. This is the Svingerud runestone. Its discovery has reshaped discussions about one of Europe's oldest writing traditions, raising questions not only about language but also about memory, ritual, and the earliest expressions of literacy in Scandinavia. The stone was discovered during excavations associated with an ancient cremation cemetery in eastern Norway. Archaeologists investigating burial features recovered several fragments of sandstone bearing unmistakable runic inscriptions. Careful analysis soon revealed that at least one fragment carried characters belonging to the earliest form of the runic alphabet known as Elder Futhark. The implications immediately attracted international attention. Runes occupy a unique place in European history. For many people, they evoke images of Viking ships, carved memorial stones, heroic sagas, and medieval Scandinavian kingdoms. Yet, the Viking Age began much later. The earliest runes appeared centuries before longships crossed northern seas. Their origins remain one of the most fascinating chapters in the history of writing. Radiocarbon dating of associated cremation materials placed the Svingerud burial within approximately 1 to 250 AD. If these dates accurately reflect the context in which the stone was used, the inscription becomes one of the oldest securely dated runic discoveries ever found. Remarkably, the stone may preserve writing from the very earliest generations of runic literacy, perhaps even from a time when the alphabet itself was still developing. Imagine that moment. Someone selects a sandstone surface. A sharp tool begins cutting precise, angular lines. Each symbol represents something still unfamiliar to much of the surrounding population. Writing itself may have been rare, special, even mysterious. The person carving those runes could scarcely have imagined that nearly 2,000 years later, scholars would examine every stroke under microscopes while debating its meaning. The inscription appears surprisingly brief. One sequence of characters has attracted particular attention. Many specialists read the central inscription as Idibarug. What exactly this word signifies remains uncertain. Several interpretations have been proposed. Perhaps it records a personal name. Perhaps the name of the individual buried nearby. Perhaps the carver. Perhaps someone entirely different. Other possibilities suggest grammatical forms now difficult to reconstruct because early runic language differed significantly from later Old Norse. The challenge begins with the nature of early writing itself. Languages evolve. Spellings change. Pronunciations shift. Words disappear entirely. The earliest runic inscriptions often survive in extremely short sequences containing little surrounding context. Unlike lengthy medieval manuscripts, these inscriptions offer few clues for interpretation. Every letter becomes important. Every damaged surface introduces uncertainty. The Svingerud runestone exemplifies this perfectly. Several additional markings appear elsewhere on the stone. Some resemble recognizable runes. Others appear incomplete or irregular. A few seem almost experimental. Researchers have wondered whether certain marks represent practice carvings rather than finished inscriptions. Could the stone preserve someone learning to write? The idea is both simple and extraordinary. Modern education encourages repeated practice. Students write letters again and again before mastering them. Might something similar have occurred nearly 2,000 years ago? Perhaps an apprentice experimented with unfamiliar symbols. Perhaps a skilled carver tested his tools before completing the primary inscription. Or perhaps every mark carried deliberate meaning now impossible to recover. The stone remains silent. Runes themselves possess a fascinating history. Most scholars believe the earliest runic alphabet developed sometime during the 1st centuries AD. Its creators were likely influenced by alphabetic writing systems already circulating across Europe, perhaps through contact with Roman culture, northern Italy, or neighboring Germanic communities. Exactly where and how the alphabet emerged continues to inspire scholarly debate. Unlike many writing systems that developed gradually over long periods, runes appear surprisingly sophisticated from their earliest surviving examples. This observation raises important questions. Did earlier experimental forms simply fail to survive? Or did the system emerge relatively quickly through adaptation from existing alphabets? The Svingerud discovery contributes valuable evidence precisely because of its early date. Every newly discovered inscription helps illuminate this formative period. The burial context deepens the mystery. The runestone fragments were associated with cremation graves containing burned bone, charcoal, and grave goods typical of the Roman Iron Age in Scandinavia. Burial rituals often preserve symbolic behavior. Objects accompanying the dead rarely serve purely practical purposes. Their placement reflects belief, memory, identity. If the inscription belonged to a funerary monument, writing itself may already have acquired ceremonial importance. Names possess remarkable power. Across cultures, preserving someone's name often becomes an act of remembrance extending beyond death. Perhaps the runes served precisely this purpose. A permanent record ensuring that one person's identity endured, even if later generations forgot the language itself. Another intriguing possibility concerns ownership. Early writing frequently develops through practical needs. Names identify possessions, communities, craftspeople, land. The inscription may have marked ownership rather than commemoration. If so, its later inclusion within a burial context raises additional questions. Was the stone originally created for another purpose before being reused? Archaeologists increasingly recognize that ancient objects often enjoyed multiple lives. Buildings became quarries. Statues acquired new meanings. Sacred places changed function across generations. The Svingerud stone may have followed a similarly complex journey. Researchers also note that the sandstone fragment appears broken. Originally, it may have formed part of a larger monument. If additional pieces remain undiscovered beneath surrounding soil, they could transform understanding of the inscription entirely. A missing line might identify a person, explain the context, complete an incomplete sentence. Sometimes archaeology depends upon fragments waiting only a few meters apart. Excavations continue expanding that possibility. One particularly fascinating aspect involves variation within the inscription itself. Certain characters differ subtly from later standardized runic forms. This observation supports the idea that the alphabet remained flexible during its earliest development. Writing systems rarely emerge fully fixed. Individual writers experiment. Regional traditions evolve. Letter shapes gradually stabilize through repeated use. The Svingerud inscription may capture precisely such a transitional moment. Rather than representing established convention, it reflects innovation in progress. This transforms the stone into more than a written message. It becomes evidence of intellectual experimentation. Someone participated in shaping one of Northern Europe's earliest literary traditions. Mainstream scholarship approaches the discovery with understandable caution. Dating relies primarily upon associated archaeological materials rather than direct dating of the stone itself. Fortunately, the burial context appears well documented. Radiocarbon analysis of cremated remains provides a reliable chronological framework. Even so, archaeologists remain careful when drawing broad historical conclusions from single discoveries. One remarkable artifact can illuminate history. It rarely rewrites everything alone. Still, the implications remain profound. If literacy reached parts of Scandinavia earlier than previously documented, assumptions regarding cultural development deserve continued examination. How widespread was runic knowledge? Who learned to carve these symbols? Were runes restricted to small elite groups, traveling specialists, religious figures, merchants? Or did writing spread more widely than surviving evidence currently suggests? The archaeological record preserves only tiny fractions of ancient life. Wood decays, leather disappears, paint fades. Countless written objects may simply have vanished because their materials could not survive. Stone endures where bark, bone, and timber often do not. Perhaps the Svingerud inscription represents only one surviving example from a much richer tradition. Another dimension concerns the symbolic nature of runes themselves. In later Norse literature, runes acquire associations extending beyond ordinary communication. They appear in healing traditions, protective charms, poetry, magic, prophecy. Although these medieval sources were written centuries after the Svingerud stone, they reveal cultural attitudes toward writing that regarded runes as possessing unusual significance. Did such beliefs already exist during the Roman Iron Age? Or did they develop gradually over succeeding centuries? Modern archaeology cannot answer confidently. Yet, the burial context naturally encourages reflection. Writing often carries emotional weight. Names preserve memory. Symbols preserve identity. The earliest runes may have held importance far exceeding simple literacy. Naturally, the discovery has also inspired more speculative interpretations. Some independent writers suggest the irregular markings preserve forgotten ceremonial knowledge rather than ordinary language. Others argue that early runes originated from much older symbolic traditions stretching deep into European prehistory. A few even propose that the alphabet appeared suddenly through influences not yet recognized by conventional scholarship. These ideas capture imagination because the origins of writing often feel mysterious. Yet, current archaeological evidence strongly supports gradual cultural development, influenced by contact between neighboring societies rather than sudden, unexplained emergence. Even so, unanswered questions remain plentiful. How exactly did people first learn these symbols? Who taught them? Where? Through what conversations? History rarely records such intimate moments. Imagine a young learner watching an experienced carver demonstrate each angular stroke. Lines must remain straight because they are cut into wood or stone. Curves prove difficult. Practice begins. Mistakes occur. Letters improve. Knowledge passes quietly from one generation to another. No historical chronicle records that lesson. Yet, without such moments, literacy could never spread. The Svingerud runestone hints at these invisible processes. Modern scientific methods continue extracting remarkable information from the site. Microscopic examination identifies carving techniques. Three-dimensional scanning records subtle tool marks. Radiocarbon dating refines chronology. Comparative linguistic analysis evaluates alternative readings. Digital imaging reveals weathered details invisible under ordinary lighting. Each advance contributes another fragment. Still, interpretation remains surprisingly open. The stone encourages humility. Its inscription appears short enough that certainty should seem achievable. Yet, each proposed translation encounters difficulties. Is Idiberug truly a personal name? If so, whose? Could it instead describe lineage, ownership, a place, or something entirely different? Every possibility remains under discussion. Perhaps that uncertainty represents the discovery's greatest gift. Rather than providing definitive answers, the Svingerud runestone reminds us that writing itself possesses a history. Alphabets do not simply appear fully formed. Someone invents, someone experiments, someone teaches, someone practices. Between invention and widespread literacy lies a forgotten landscape populated by ordinary individuals whose names almost never survive. Ironically, one of those names may now rest before us. If Idiberug indeed identifies a person, we stand astonishingly close to hearing one of the earliest preserved names ever written in runes. Yet, we cannot be entirely certain. The letters remain. The identity hovers just beyond complete understanding. Perhaps, somewhere beneath another Norwegian field, another early runestone still lies undisturbed, preserving a longer inscription that will clarify everything. Or perhaps fragments waiting inside forgotten burial grounds will reveal how the earliest runic writers learned, experimented, and shared their remarkable new alphabet. Until those discoveries emerge, the Svingerud runestone continues standing at the threshold between invention and memory, a modest piece of sandstone preserving not only ancient symbols, but one of the earliest surviving echoes of a written tradition that would shape Northern Europe for centuries, while still keeping some of its first words quietly to itself. Beneath the rolling hills of Shanxi province, where fields stretch across the landscape and distant mountains fade into pale horizons, an underground palace rests in permanent darkness. From the surface, little reveals what lies below. The earth appears calm, shaped by centuries of farming and changing seasons. Yet, beneath those quiet fields extends a carefully constructed tomb, where painted figures still walk silent corridors exactly as they did when artists laid down their final brushstrokes more than 1,300 years ago. This is the tomb of Princess Yongtai. It is also a doorway into one of the most remarkable visual records of the Tang dynasty ever discovered. Descending into the burial chambers feels less like entering a grave than stepping into another world. Walls become galleries. Passageways transform into ceremonial avenues. Every surface seems alive with carefully painted attendants, officials, horses, musicians, noblewomen, and guardians. They do not simply decorate the tomb. They appear to accompany its occupant into eternity. Yet, beneath this extraordinary beauty lies a story marked by political turmoil, personal tragedy, and enduring mystery. Princess Yongtai was born Li Xianhui, a member of the imperial family during one of the most fascinating periods in Chinese history. The Tang dynasty is often remembered as a golden age of cultural achievement. Poetry flourished. International trade expanded along the Silk Road. Art, architecture, science, and philosophy reached extraordinary heights. The imperial capital of Chang'an became one of the largest and most cosmopolitan cities in the world. merchants arrived from distant lands. Ideas crossed continents. Religions met. Cultures blended. The empire projected confidence and sophistication across Asia. Yet, beneath this prosperity, court politics remained deeply complex. Power shifted constantly. Alliances formed and dissolved. Families rose rapidly before falling with equal speed. The story of Princess Yongtai unfolded within this uncertain world. Historical records suggest that she died in 701 AD at only 17 years of age. Her death occurred during the reign of one of history's most remarkable rulers, Empress Wu Zetian, the only woman ever to rule China as emperor in her own name. The circumstances surrounding Yongtai's death have long attracted attention. Traditional historical sources claim that she and her husband became entangled in dangerous court politics after criticizing powerful members of the imperial family. Some accounts suggest they were ordered to take their own lives. Others imply that political pressure left them with no alternative. Modern historians approach these reports cautiously. Ancient court histories often blended documented events with political interpretation. Even so, few doubt that the young princess became one of many victims of intense struggles within the imperial court. Years later, after political circumstances changed, she received a magnificent reburial worthy of imperial status. It was during this later burial that the extraordinary tomb murals were created. The tomb itself reflects the grandeur of Tang funerary architecture. Long, sloping passageways descend beneath the earth. Side chambers branch outward. Vaulted ceilings create the impression of underground halls rather than confined burial spaces. The entire structure was designed not merely to protect remains, but to recreate an idealized version of courtly life beyond death. The murals cover vast sections of these passageways. Painted with remarkable technical skill, they preserve details of clothing, hairstyles, architecture, ceremony, and daily life unmatched by almost any written description. Each figure appears caught within a quiet moment. Ladies of the court walk gracefully through palace corridors. Officials stand in formal procession. Stable attendants prepare elegant horses. Musicians seem almost ready to begin performing. Nothing appears hurried. Everything feels composed, balanced, timeless. Perhaps the most striking feature is the extraordinary realism achieved by Tang artists. Faces display individual expression. Robes fall naturally across moving bodies. Animals possess convincing anatomy. Perspective remains limited compared with modern painting, yet the scenes communicate remarkable vitality. The artists understood observation. They painted not only status, but personality. Even after centuries underground, viewers often experience the impression that these individuals continue living within their painted world. For archaeologists, the murals provide an invaluable historical record. Written documents describe imperial ceremonies. The paintings show them. Texts mention clothing. The murals preserve colors, fabrics, and patterns. Official histories list court positions. The walls reveal how those officials stood, moved, and interacted. Art becomes historical evidence. Every painted detail contributes another fragment to understanding Tang society. Yet, despite this wealth of information, profound mysteries remain. Many figures cannot be identified individually. Some scenes appear symbolic rather than literal. Certain decorative elements may carry meanings now completely forgotten. The tomb preserves images, not explanations. One particularly fascinating aspect concerns the women depicted throughout the murals. Tang society granted elite women a degree of visibility and participation unusual for many earlier periods. Court ladies appear confident, elegant, active. Their hairstyles rise into elaborate arrangements reflecting changing fashions. Flowing garments emphasize movement rather than rigid formality. Some women ride horses. Others attend ceremonies. Together, they present an image of court life remarkably rich in detail. Were these portraits of actual attendants who served the princess? Idealized representations, symbolic companions intended for the afterlife. Perhaps all three possibilities overlap. Ancient funerary art often combines reality with aspiration. The tomb does not necessarily portray life exactly as it was. Instead, it presents life as it ought to continue beyond death. Another remarkable feature involves the procession scenes. Officials line the passageways in carefully ordered ranks. Their placement transforms the tomb's corridors into ceremonial routes. As visitors descend, they symbolically retrace the path taken by the princess herself. The architecture and paintings work together. Movement becomes ritual. The viewer participates unknowingly in an ancient ceremonial design. This sophisticated integration of art and space demonstrates remarkable planning. Nothing appears random. Every image occupies a deliberate position. The deeper one travels underground, the more complete the illusion becomes. Scholars generally interpret these murals within the broader tradition of Tang funerary belief. Death was not viewed simply as an ending. The afterlife required provision, comfort, status, protection. Just as tombs contained objects intended for continued use beyond death, painted attendants and officials may have served similar symbolic purposes. The princess entered eternity surrounded by the same dignity appropriate to her imperial rank. The walls ensured that ceremony would never cease. Yet certain details encourage further reflection. Some painted figures display subtle individuality unexpected in purely symbolic representations. Expressions differ. Postures vary. Small gestures suggest observation from life. Could the artists have portrayed real members of the imperial household? Friends, servants, musicians, officials known personally to the princess? If so, the murals preserve fleeting glimpses of individuals whose names disappeared long ago. History remembers emperors. The paintings quietly remember everyone else. The artistic techniques themselves reveal extraordinary sophistication. Mineral pigments created vivid reds, greens, blues, and blacks. Fine brushes produce delicate outlines defining faces and garments. Layer upon layer built subtle shading and texture. Despite spending more than a millennium underground, many colors survived with astonishing brilliance until excavation exposed them once again to light. For centuries, complete darkness preserved what sunlight might have destroyed. Ironically, concealment became conservation. Modern archaeologists therefore face delicate challenges. Excavation reveals beauty. Exposure also begins gradual deterioration. Humidity changes. Temperature fluctuates. Pigments react to new environmental conditions. Preserving the murals requires balancing scientific investigation with careful protection. Sometimes, leaving part of the past untouched remains the wisest decision. Another intriguing question concerns artistic authorship. Who painted these extraordinary walls? Imperial workshops employed highly skilled artisans capable of monumental, decorative projects. The artists almost certainly possessed years of formal training. Yet, history records remarkably few of their names. The murals survive. The creators remain largely anonymous. Their greatest achievement became invisible beneath the earth almost immediately after completion. Imagine spending months perfecting these magnificent paintings, knowing that almost no living person would ever see them again. Such devotion suggests motivations extending beyond ordinary artistic ambition. The work itself became an offering, a final act of respect. The influence of the Silk Road also appears subtly throughout Tang art. During this remarkable era, goods, ideas, artistic styles, and religious traditions traveled enormous distances across Eurasia. Foreign merchants visited Chang'an. Musicians introduced unfamiliar instruments. Textiles displayed distant influences. Although the Yongtai murals primarily reflect imperial Chinese traditions, careful observers occasionally identify stylistic elements hinting at broader cultural exchange. The Tang court stood at the center of an interconnected world. Its art naturally reflected that diversity. Naturally, certain aspects of the murals have inspired more speculative interpretations. Some independent researchers suggest hidden symbolic programs encoded within the paintings. Others propose that particular arrangements of figures preserve secret political messages criticizing court events surrounding the princess's death. A few even argue that subtle visual patterns point toward esoteric philosophical traditions understood only by select members of the imperial elite. Such ideas remain difficult to verify. Most mainstream scholars interpret the murals primarily as funerary art shaped by established Tang conventions rather than concealed political commentary. Even so, symbolism undoubtedly exists. The challenge lies in distinguishing intentional symbolism from modern projection. Perhaps the greatest mystery concerns absence rather than presence. What no longer survives? Organic textiles vanished. Wooden furnishings decayed. Flowers disappeared. Perfumes faded. Music ended. The murals preserve visual fragments of a richly furnished world now otherwise lost. They hint constantly at experiences beyond archaeology's reach. The sound of court orchestras, the fragrance of incense, the texture of embroidered silk, the conversations echoing through palace halls. Paint cannot preserve these things, yet somehow it reminds us they once existed. Scientific research continues revealing new insights. Pigment analysis identifies mineral sources. Microscopic examination reconstructs painting techniques. Digital imaging recovers faded details invisible to ordinary observation. Three-dimensional scanning records every brushstroke with astonishing precision. Each technological advance deepens historical understanding. Still, the emotional dimension remains remarkably elusive. How did Princess Yongtai herself experience court life? Did she know her political fate was approaching? Did the artists painting her tomb ever meet her? Were they instructed to portray reality faithfully or create an idealized vision? No surviving document answers these questions. The murals remain both historical record and carefully constructed memory. Their relationship to reality is necessarily incomplete. Perhaps that incompleteness explains their enduring fascination. Unlike written chronicles presenting orderly narratives, paintings preserve ambiguity. Every face invites interpretation. Every gesture suggests untold stories. Every corridor leads toward another unanswered question. The underground palace becomes not merely a burial place but a suspended moment in time. A world interrupted, waiting silently beneath the earth. As modern visitors move through these painted passageways, they encounter not only the memory of one young princess, but also the extraordinary confidence of an entire civilization. The Tang artists believed that beauty, ceremony, and dignity deserved to accompany the dead into eternity. More than 13 centuries later, their work continues fulfilling that purpose with astonishing grace. Yet, beyond the illuminated murals, behind unopened chambers, beneath neighboring hills that still conceal countless imperial burials, how many other painted worlds remain untouched by daylight? And if those sealed corridors are ever opened, what forgotten faces may still be waiting patiently in the darkness, carrying stories that history has not yet remembered?